Chapter 1292. To be able to store so much food at home in a year of famine, it wasn't an exaggeration to say that he was rich and heartless. If such a person died, then so be it. There was nothing to feel pity about. As for shifting the blame to the five-star army, Shuang didn't really care. These people's actions had indirectly helped him, expanding the reputation of the five-star army. So why not? Bai Shuang clearly remembered that his teacher Yang Chendong had said more than once that the existence of social class was the greatest restriction to the five-star army in Yangxie. This was especially true for some of the nobles. Although the dynasties changed frequently, they would never fall. People like this who only cared about their own interests and had no loyalty to the current dynasty would often become new meritorious officials of a new dynasty. There was nothing wrong with killing such people who had no ruler, no country, and no father. Only by killing all of these people would the five-star army have a better chance of conquering and controlling the land. Not only that, if they did it well, they would gain the support of the commoners. In comparison, the commoners were the ones who suffered the most. They had been oppressed by these nobles for who knew how many years. Some of them had been oppressed since their ancestors, so it was impossible for them to not be angry. The only reason why they didn't say anything was because they were too cowardly and didn't have enough strength. Since it was like this, the five-star army could help them and be the leader. Reality proved that this was indeed quite effective. This was because in many places, especially the commoners who had been oppressed by the nobles, began to look forward to the arrival of the five-star army. Some of the more far-sighted ones had already brought their travel expenses with them to find a five-star army and join them. Their many years of life experience told them that only the five-star army could save them. Only the five-star army could help them change their lives. Bai Shuang fully understood his teacher Yang Chendong's philosophy and did as he was told. The result was that not only did the strength of the foreign race's first army not decrease, it was instead continuously expanding. As for the young and strong civilians who wanted to join the army, he accepted them all and organized them into the 4 divisions under his command. With the presence of these people, they would be more familiar with and understand the surrounding environment. Some of the following military battle plans would also be better supplemented and perfected. The effect was so good that Yang Chendong had never thought of it before. Compared to the first army, the progress of the new 5 armies was also very smooth. When moving behind the enemy lines, without enough information, it was easy to fall into danger. Sui felt a great amount of pressure. The number of scouts he sent out was sufficient, and the distance they covered was far enough. This was the reason why he didn't lose. With the existence of these excellent scouts, the moment the 100,000 Kazakh Empire troops appeared 100 li away, the news was sent back. When he learned that the enemy had 100,000 cavalrymen, the first thing Sui did wasn't to run away, but to calm down and consider whether or not he could take down these 100,000 soldiers. 30,000 against 100,000, and he still wanted to take down the enemy. This was no different from a snake trying to swallow an elephant. In the eyes of others, this was overestimating one's capabilities. However, in the eyes of Sui and his new army, this really wasn't an impossible task. It was because of the 3 armies sent to attack the enemy's rear. His new army was the closest to Yang Chendong's main force, as well as the one with the highest chance of receiving assistance in the shortest amount of time. Send a report to the 6th young master. Tell him about the situation here. Tell him about our plans to take down the enemy and our battle plan. After just a stick of incense's time, Sui made his decision. He wanted to create a miracle. The messenger quickly left after receiving the order. Sui then said to the 4 division commanders at his side, "Inform the soldiers to rest here. We need to recover our strength in preparation for the great battle." When he saw how confident Sui was, the 4th Cavalry Division's Commander Chong Bo couldn't help but feel worried. "Military Commander, will the king agree to our request?" These words attracted the attention of the other 3 division commanders. It was clear that this was also a question they were concerned about. However, Sui's expression didn't seem to care as he said, "If the 6th young master agrees, then we'll fight this battle well. If he doesn't agree, then we'll retreat. It's just a moment of rest. Sui's meaning was extremely clear. He wasn't sure if Yang Qindong would agree, so he made two preparations. Would Yang Qindong agree? When the telegram was sent, he didn't immediately give an answer. Instead, he stared at the telegram for a long time. The Kazakh Empire and the Aries dynasty had sent a total of 250,000 cavalrymen to aid the Middle Kingdom. He had already received the news from the intelligence department. Yang Qindong welcomed their troops because it gave him an excuse to invade the two countries. Just like when he entered the Ili region, didn't he also say that he wanted to take revenge? Even though the matter of Ili sending troops had happened a long time ago, this excuse was a bit forced. But even if it was an excuse, who cared if it was prudent or not? And now, these two countries had given him a legitimate reason. However, to achieve the effect of this ambush, and for the military plans to be completed smoothly, there was another point that couldn't be ignored. That was whether or not the Turpan army would send out their troops. Chapter 1293. If the Turpan army were to send troops to assist the Kazakh army, or to help them intercept the Kazakh army, then what they would have to face would not only be 100,000 enemy cavalry, but even more. If that was the case, whether or not they could smoothly win this battle would be full of suspense. When the two division commanders raised their concerns, Yang Qindong confidently waved his hand. No, that won't happen. Kelly is a very conceited person. Last time, he lost to us, so he won't accept it. This time, he has the opportunity to fight with us alone, so he won't lightly ask for help from the Turpan army. Besides, unless it is necessary, he won't be willing to share such a big merit with others. You can rest assured about this. Of course, if the battle doesn't reach a state where we can kill them in one blow, then no one knows what will happen. This requires us to appear outside the ambush area on time. As long as we can do this and trap the enemy in Tianbo Mound, then even if they ask for help, it will be too late. Yang Qindong deeply understood the principle of knowing oneself and knowing one's enemy to be victorious in 100 battles. Often, when facing an army, the attitude of the enemy's general would determine the final direction of the battle. It could be said that he had studied Kelly thoroughly, which was why he could say these words so confidently. Seeing the sixth young master so confident, Tian Hu and Ling Daqiang looked at each other and nodded. In their view, even if there was an accident in the battle and Kelly asked for help from the Turpan army, with their ability, they could just retreat. Would they really be surrounded? After the three of them discussed for a while, they came up with a final strategy. Then, the two generals left the tent to count the troops. Yang Qindong also called Beta Percy and asked him to gather 2,000 black cavalry to prepare to fight with the 4th Division. At the same time, he also asked Wang Shan to send a telegram to the new army commander Su He, ordering him to lure the enemy in and lead the Kazakh cavalry into Tianbo Mound and into the ambush area. With a single order, the army began to get busy. In order to not alert the enemy, Yang Qindong ordered the remaining troops to continue towards Kuenlai City and attack the city according to the plan to attract the enemy's attention. Meanwhile, he himself led the Black Cavalry Dragon Guards and the main force of the 4th Division to leave the official road and head towards Botian Mound. The location of the ambush had been determined, and the next thing to do was to reach the location within the specified time. This would determine the success or failure of this battle. Therefore, after leaving the official road, Yang Qindong and the Black Cavalry rode fast horses and galloped with the main force of the 4th Division. In order to reach their destination on time, the soldiers of the 4th Army Division traveled light. They didn't bring anything they didn't need to ensure their speed. It was the same for the Black Knights and Dragon Guards. Each of them was given 3 strong horses. After a while, they would change horses to ensure that they maintained the same speed as they reached their destination. At the same time, the new army commander Su He received the order. After seeing Yang Qindong's telegram, he called the 4 division commanders over. First, he found the location of Tianbo Mound on the sand table, and then read out the military order. Everyone, this time, the 6th young master will personally lead the troops in a battle. Our new army's opportunity to show off has come. Now, I announced that the task of luring the enemy will be handed over to. So he didn't immediately make a decision. Instead, he looked at the 4 division commanders one by one. Feeling Su He's gaze, the 4 division commanders tried their best to raise their heads, showing their determination to fight. The task will be handed over to the 1st Cavalry Division. Division Commander Ko. Is there a problem? In the end, his gaze fell on Division Commander Bai Kai. The 4 division commanders of the new army were all brave and fierce. On the battlefield, they were all experts on horseback, but at the same time, they all had their own specialties. But in terms of commanding ability, Kalu, who almost became a division commander, was better. This person was good at coordinating the overall situation, especially when it came to defense. Giving this task to him was the most reassuring. Kalu's body tensed up when his name was called. He knew that this was the division commander's way of giving him a chance to perform. Previously, because he helped the 1st Army's former division commander, Su could hide military intelligence. He was given a warning, and because of that, he lost the chance to become a division commander. Now that the opportunity had appeared in front of him again, he immediately replied loudly, "Yes, I promise to complete the task." It's good to have confidence, but this time, you're using a division to lure 100,000 soldiers. In order to not let them see anything, the other 3 divisions must retreat and not give you any help. It can be said that the success or failure of this battle will all depend on you. Do you understand the importance of this task? After all, this was not a small matter. It involved the victory or defeat of nearly 200,000 soldiers. Sui had no choice but to remind Kalu. This subordinate understands. Division Commander, please rest assured. If this task is not completed, I will bring my head to see you. Kalu naturally knew the difficulty of this task, but he was not afraid. He believed in the soldiers of the 1st Cavalry Division. He also believed that as long as the preparations were done well, the task would definitely be completed. Good. What he needed was Kalu's determination. Sui nodded with satisfaction. Then he ordered the other 3 divisions to raise their flags and pretend to retreat in a sorry state. Of course, this was to let the Kazakh cavalry see. This was also the only thing he could do for Kalu's 1st Cavalry Division. After that, the 3 divisions of the new army's main force ran away. In order to make it seem more realistic, Suhi ordered the troops to throw away some of their equipment after a certain distance. This made it seem like they were retreating in a hurry and fleeing in a sorry state. Only by doing this could they lure the enemy's army into an ambush circle. This action of a new army was quickly discovered by the Kazakh cavalry scouts. One by one, they reported it to General Kelly I, causing him to laugh uncontrollably. Good. It seems like our sudden appearance has indeed caught the 5-star army off guard. Very good. Order the army to speed up and catch up to the 5-star army. Then we'll eat them up. After Kelly I returned to Kazakh after his defeat, although his brother Janabek Khan did not blame him, he still felt very uncomfortable in his heart, especially the unwillingness in his heart. From the beginning to the end, he did not have a chance to properly fight with the 5-star army. This made him feel even more unjust. If it was a fair battle and he lost, then there was nothing to say. However, losing to an ally was something that he could not accept. This time, he brought another 100,000 troops to battle. He had thought it through and decided that he must have a fair battle with the 5-star army. He wanted to let the enemy know the power of the Kazakh cavalry. Kelly I happily gave the order. His deputy, who was personally placed in the army by Janabek Khan, narrowed his eyes and stepped out. "General, should we send a message to the king of Turpan and ask him to cooperate with us to block the 5-star army's escape route?" HM. Hearing this suggestion, Kelly I did not immediately reply. Instead, he fell into deep thought. Of course, he knew that blocking the 2 sides was much more effective than chasing after them alone. However, deep in his bones, he did not trust these allies. He did not want to share this great merit with others. If the Turpan army appeared and blocked the 5-star army's escape route, then he would be very unwilling to share the merit with others. After thinking about it again and again, he decided to give it a try. If it really did not work, then he would send someone to inform the Turpan army. Furthermore, he had 100,000 soldiers and the enemy only had 30,000 cavalry. No matter how he looked at it, there was no possibility of him losing. Kelly was just like Yang Chendong. He did not inform the Turpan army of the situation. This was also his fate. This would also become the most regretful thing in his life. After making up his mind, Kelly ordered General Porta to be the vanguard and move quickly. The order he gave was to quickly chase after the escaping five-star army and viciously bite their tails. It would be best if they could tangle with them and create enough time and opportunity for the main force to arrive and form an encirclement. Porta was also a famous general in Kazakh. After receiving the order, he immediately ordered 10,000 cavalrymen and 3 days' worth of rations to leave the barracks and run in the direction of the new army's escape route. To be appointed as the vanguard general, Porta was very ambitious. He wanted to achieve the greatest merit to prove his ability. However, this raging fire was quickly extinguished. Just as he was about to reach a valley after forcefully marching for 100 miles, countless arrows suddenly flew out from both sides of the road. His vanguard of 1,000 cavalrymen quickly suffered heavy losses. In the end, only 200 to 300 of them managed to escape. They had a bad start. When Porta heard the news, he was very angry. He angrily scolded the vanguard general for being incompetent and cowardly. Then, he personally led 3,000 cavalrymen to the front. As expected, as soon as they arrived, they were attacked by arrows. However, Porta was prepared and quickly launched a counterattack. He ordered his cavalrymen to split into 2 groups and rush to the high ground on both sides. Under Porta's command, the 3,000 cavalrymen rushed through the waves of arrows and rushed to the top of the valley, which was more than 20 meters high. The 2,000 five-star army that were lying in ambush here kept retreating. Many bows and quivers were thrown all over the ground, and the few war horses were abandoned as well. Seeing the result of this battle and the five-star soldiers rushing into the dense forest in the distance, Boda threw his head back and laughed heartily to release the joy in his heart. However, he did not notice that although they had captured a lot, they did not leave behind a single five-star army soldier. However, at this moment, he was completely enjoying the feeling of victory. Everything else had already been thrown to the back of his mind. Do you see that? This is the powerful five-star army that people have been talking about. Come on, let's continue forward. Porta was happy, and the vanguard continued to move forward. Chapter 1294. After another 5 kilometers, another wave of arrows arrived. But this time, the Kazakh cavalry were prepared and did not panic. Other than a few dozen who were injured by the first wave of arrows, the rest of the cavalry quickly rushed up the canyon and chased away the five-star army. After 2 consecutive victories, the Kazakh army's morale was greatly boosted and their speed seemed to have increased a lot. However, after 5 kilometers, another wave of arrows came, forcing them to slow down their pace. Because of this, there were a total of 5 waves of arrows by the time the sky turned dark. The distance of the attacks had also changed from once every 10 miles to once every 5 miles. Fortunately, this kind of attack did not cause too much damage to the Kazakh vanguard. The total number of Kazakh cavalry was less than 1,000. This was also because they lost 600 to 700 cavalry in the first wave. Considering that it was dark and difficult to see, Boda had to order the army to stop and rest in order to avoid falling into the enemy's trap. Boda, who was lying in the temporary tent, had a face full of excitement. Today, he had repelled 5 waves of attacks from the five-star army and obtained 2,000 sets of bows. This was an amazing achievement. With such a satisfied smile on her face, the busty woman slept all the way until dawn. What made him feel a little regretful was that the five-star army did not come to harass him that night. This made the 4,000 cavalry that he had hidden outside the camp not come in handy, which was somewhat disappointing. But did this mean that the five-star army did not have the ability to ambush him, and that they had already left? General Boda, who possessed the spirit of AQ, gave the order to advance at full speed after breakfast. After walking for a full 20 miles, they did not encounter any harassment or attacks. This made Boda even more certain that the 5 astral legions had escaped. Now he could finally let go of his hands and feet and advance at full speed. Not long after his order was issued, the army's formation began to scatter after advancing for more than 3 kilometers. The arrow attacks that had disappeared for a while appeared again. The attacks from the bows and arrows in the dense forest were even more intense than before. In just one wave of attacks, over 100 riders were hit by the arrows. Cries of pain and curses rose and fell one after another. The sudden counterattack was completely unexpected, and the Kazakh cavalry, who had already lowered their vigilance, suffered a great loss. What was even more frightening was that after the 2 waves of arrows were fired, the 5-star army still charged forward, brandishing their sabers as they charged into the enemy's ranks. Immediately, streams of blood splattered out, dyeing the 5-star army's armor red. "Don't panic, counterattack, counterattack!" Seeing soldiers falling off their horses, Boda roared and led the cavalry around him in a counterattack. However, the 5-star army's cavalry came quickly and left even faster. They didn't give Porto a chance to counterattack and disappeared into the dense forest on both sides. By the time Sark's army arrived, they had already disappeared. This was clearly a premeditated attack. With the mentality of running after one shot, they came and went without a trace. After they left, General Boda sadly discovered that in just half an hour, he had lost over 1,000 cavalrymen, and the number of injured soldiers had increased by nearly 1,000. This kind of loss was a huge blow to General Boda. They hadn't even engaged the enemy yet, but they had already lost nearly 30% of their strength. This made him have no choice but to be vigilant and send as many scouts as possible into the dense forest to ensure the safety of the vanguard. The advantage of doing this was that the possibility of a surprise attack was very small, but because of this, the marching speed of the army had to be slowed down. 15 miles away, the commander of the new army's 1st Cavalry Division, Kalu, was waiting for news with the main force. After seeing the 1st Regiment return, Kalu couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. Especially when he saw the smell of blood on the returning soldiers. He knew that the harvest was not small. Division Master, according to the mission, the scouts have reported that the enemy has already slowed down their marching pace. The Tan commander Wu Ba chuckled, his face full of pride. In this battle, he had led 2,000 cavalrymen and achieved a 1:1 ratio of casualties. On the other hand, he had lost less than 50 cavalrymen. This result could be said to be perfect. Hearing Wu Ba's report, Kalu nodded with satisfaction. "Very good. This time, your 1st regiment will be given a merit. Next, we will continue to harass them. In short, we must delay the enemy's advance. 80 miles behind us is Bo Tian Mound. That will be the end of our retreat." There were still 3 days before the main force would complete the encirclement. In other words, he had to hold on for 3 more days. A distance of 80 miles could be covered in just a few hours for elite cavalrymen. One could imagine how much pressure he was under. As a regiment commander, Wu Ban naturally knew about their 1st Cavalry Division's mission. The complacent expression on his face immediately vanished. "Don't worry, division leader. We will definitely complete the mission. Even if we have to sacrifice all of our brothers, we will still hold on for 3 days. That's right. This time, even if all of our 1st Cavalry Division dies, we will not let the enemy pass through Bo Tian Mound." Commander Kalu, who had always advocated for the smallest price to obtain the greatest victory, also changed his style at this moment. He was ready to go all out. If it was said that the loss of the 1st Cavalry Division would be able to kill 100,000 Kazakh cavalrymen, it would be worth it no matter how one looked at it. When Kalu received this mission, he knew that this was going to be a fierce battle. Although he did not like this way of fighting, as a soldier, it was his duty to obey orders. For the greatest victory, so what if the 1st Cavalry Division lost their lives here? General Boda naturally did not know Kalu's plan. Because of the repeated attacks, he became more cautious. When the army advanced, the distance between the cavalrymen became closer. In addition, the number of scouts increased. Although the 5-star army would occasionally appear to harass the enemy, most of them were repelled by General Boda. The army did not suffer any losses. The price of this was that the marching speed of the army was very slow, to the point that by noon the next day, General Kelly had already caught up to them with the main force. After seeing the vanguard moving so slowly, Kelly was naturally dissatisfied. He had a guard called Boda over and scolded him. Boda also knew that the marching speed was too slow, so he did not say anything. When he saw that Kelly was tired of scolding, he made his request. He needed more cavalry. Only by increasing the number of scouts could the army advance faster. Kelly still valued Boda very much. Otherwise, he would not have arranged for him to be the vanguard general. Since Boda said so, he naturally had his own considerations and difficulties. Kelly quickly agreed to this request. He immediately assigned 5,000 cavalrymen to the vanguard as scouts. With the addition of these new cavalrymen, whenever there was a dense forest on both sides of the road, groups of cavalrymen would rush into it, looking for any unsafe factors. It was also because of this action that several companies of the Five-Star Army that had been lying in ambush were discovered. Among them, one company was a little slow in retreating and was surrounded by these Kazakh cavalry scouts. After an hour of bitter battle, the company was completely wiped out. When the news reached the ears of Division Commander Kalu, his face became very serious. There were still 2 days before the main force could complete the encirclement. The speed and reaction of the Kazakh cavalry far exceeded his expectations. If he did not send out the main force, he was afraid that they would not be able to last until then. Order the 2nd Regiment to attack in units. In short, the main task is to delay the enemy's advance. If we can fight, then we can. If we can delay, then we can. Kalu gave the order with a pained expression. When he saw the 2nd Regiment commander leading the soldiers of the 2nd Regiment away, his eyes were filled with tears. He was very clear in his heart that it would be good if 20% of the soldiers came back. They're all heroes. Gazing at the departing figures of the 2nd Regiment, the 1st Regiment commander Wu Ba also spoke like this. Then, when he turned around to look at Kalu, he stood at attention and said, "Senior Commander, the 1st Regiment requests permission to attack after the 2nd Regiment." "No, the 1st Regiment will stay behind and fight for the last time." Kalu shook his head. In terms of fighting strength, the 1st Regiment was naturally the strongest. Since that was the case, the best steel should be used on the edge of the blade. When the time came, he and the 1st Regiment will be the last barrier to stop the Kazakh army from advancing. Time passed by minute. The 3rd Regiment of the 4th Regiment and the 2,000 Black Cavalry, led by Yang Qindong, had arrived at the designated location 3 hours earlier than planned. From their point of view, they could faintly hear the sounds of killing from time to time. "Young master, our soldiers have found suitable places to hide." Beta Persei returned to Yang Qindong's side after patrolling the army. At the same time, he reported to Yang Qindong with a trace of worry on his face. Yang Qindong knew what Beta Persei was worried about. Not long ago, the commander of the new army, Su He, sent a telegram. After they got rid of the scouts sent by the Kazakh army, they were now rushing to the exit of Batian Mound. In other words, the main force of the new army had not arrived yet. Now, only the 1st Cavalry Division, who had stayed here in advance, could fight the enemy. A division of only 8,000 people, but they had to stop 100,000 iron cavalry. One could imagine how difficult this task was. Even if Beta Persei led the team, he could not guarantee that they would be able to complete the task. After Yang Qindong heard the report, his expression did not change. He put away the military binoculars in his hand and said, without turning his head, "Go and ask where the 1st Cavalry Division is and how long it will take to reach the designated location." Chapter 1295. "Yes, I'll go right away." Beta Persei agreed and rushed to Wang Shan's telegram team. Yang Qindong, who was left behind, slowly turned around and sighed softly. How could he not know what kind of pressure the new army's 1st Cavalry Division was facing at this time? It was even possible that the entire division would be wiped out if they were not careful. But this was war, a war of blood and iron. It was either you die or I die. Anyone who was in the middle of it, if they showed even the slightest bit of mercy, they might cause the army to be doomed eternally. As the saying goes, the merciful cannot command an army. To achieve one's goal, there must be sacrifices. As long as the sacrifice was worth it, someone must do it. No matter how reluctant he was, he had to harden his heart. He had to be willing to give up. Only by giving up could he gain something. He saw this point very clearly and was also very rational. Now he only hoped that the 1st Cavalry Division could arrive at the designated location as soon as possible. This way, the pressure on the new Army's 1st Cavalry Division should be much less. The 1st Cavalry Division was indeed the trump card of the cavalry. Under the leadership of Division Commander Tian, who they had been hurrying on their way ever since they received the mission. During this period, many warhorses fell to the side of the road due to exhaustion, foaming at the mouth, but Tian, who still did not order the troops to slow down. He only left a company of soldiers to take care of these meritorious warhorses. The main force of the division was still moving forward bravely. After several days of continuous travel, even the soldiers of the 1st Cavalry Division, who were regarded as the most elite and powerful existence among the cavalry, still had many soldiers whose legs were worn out and blood flowed down their trousers. There were also some soldiers who did not get any rest for a long time. They fell asleep while sitting on their war horses. Some even fell off their horses because they could not hold the reins and were injured. There were casualties at any time. But no matter what happened, Tian, who did not ask them to stop even once. Even if they had to eat, he asked the soldiers to eat on horseback. It was only at this time that the war horses would slow down from their galloping state. But even so, the cavalry soldiers were still a bit faster than the other cavalry units. After a few days of nonstop travel, they finally arrived at the designated ambush location. At this moment, they were 8 hours ahead of schedule. This half a day's time was bought with the lives of the brave warriors of the 1st Cavalry Division. According to the statistics, out of the 20,000 people in the division, the number of non-combat casualties during the march had reached 2,000. They were the world's #1 cavalry division. Every soldier who could enter this place was carefully selected. Even so, the losses they suffered were so great. It could be imagined that this operation was clearly not a mission, but a race against time and life. As soon as they entered battle position, the transmitter immediately reported the news to Yang Qindong through the radio. After hearing the news, Yang Qindong, who always had a cold expression on the battlefield, couldn't help but exclaim loudly, "Good, the soldiers are all good. After this battle, all of you will have meritorious service. Now, it is time for us to attack. Inform the new army and the 1st Cavalry Division that we will launch an all-out attack in half an hour. We must annihilate the enemy." Within the long and narrow Batian Mound Canyon, the battle was currently in full swing. The smell of blood filled everyone's nostrils. Blood could be seen everywhere, dyeing the ground red. The Kazakh army's performance was far more ferocious than Division Commander Kalu had expected. They seemed to have already seen through the 5-star army's intention to stop them. As soon as they entered the canyon, they launched a frenzied attack. As if frightened by the tall mountains and boulders on both sides of the road, General Kelly I continuously sent reinforcements to the vanguard, striving to leave this place as quickly as possible, rushing out of this dangerous place that he felt was far from good. During this period of time, General Kelly I did hesitate. After looking at the surrounding terrain, he discovered that this was a very good place to set up an ambush. He thought of ordering the army to retreat. Since there was the 5-star army blocking the way, they could just retreat from here. However, when he considered the fact that there were carriages carrying provisions and supplies behind them, it would be easy for the cavalry to turn around. However, it wouldn't be so easy for the supply carriages to turn around. If they rashly moved forward, the army would be in chaos and a scene of internal strife would occur. At that time, if the 5-star army came from behind, the consequences would be unimaginable. Yesterday, the scouts also sent news that they didn't discover any 5-star army's main force. I think my worries were unnecessary. Kelly I comforted himself like this. At the same time, he had a trace of hope in his heart. He also gave the vanguard General Boda a death order. Within 4 hours, They had to open this passage and let the army smoothly pass through here. For this, he added another 10,000 soldiers to the vanguard. Boda, who had the authority to command more troops, had his morale greatly boosted. Under his command, he led the cavalry to charge forward fiercely and quickly wiped out the main force of the new army's 1st Cavalry Division. After a series of battles, the exit of the canyon was right in front of them. Hope was right in front of them. The 1st Cavalry Division, who fought with all their might, couldn't stop themselves from retreating. During this time, Kalu, who was the division commander, also pulled out his saber and joined the battle. Even the direct, subordinate battalion of the 1st Cavalry Division charged forward. It was precisely because Kalu had suppressed the last of his strength that he was able to save the life of the 1st Regiment commander, Wu Ba, allowing this regiment commander, who had already fainted, to be pulled back from the battlefield. However, at this time, there were less than 500 cavalrymen left. In a short 2 days, the 1st Cavalry Division went from a full strength of 8,400 men to less than 1,000 men. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that they were almost completely wiped out. This result was far more tragic than what Kalu had imagined. Kalu, who was wearing a white battle robe that was now dyed red, turned his wrist and looked at the military watch that the 6th young master had personally given to him. His face was gloomy. There were still 14 hours until the appointed time, but the soldiers in his hands were almost exhausted. Perhaps in the next charge, the entire army would be wiped out. He might also die on the battlefield like the majority of the soldiers, wrapped in horsehide. If he were to die on the battlefield, Kalu had already mentally prepared himself for this from the day he joined the 5-star army. However, he really couldn't accept dying like this. He still hadn't completed his mission. Once the Kazakh army charged out of the canyon behind them, all of the plans that Yang Chendong had made before would become useless. The soldiers of the 1st Cavalry Division would also die in vain. This was something that he absolutely couldn't accept. Fight, no matter what. We have to hold on for 16 hours. Kalu used his blood-soaked battle robe to wipe the glowing white saber in his hand. His face flashed with a resolute expression. There were less than 1,000 cavalrymen around him. Most of them were injured, and some of them were even seriously injured. They were still bleeding. However, at this moment, no one doubted his words. They firmly believed that as long as they were still alive, they wouldn't allow any enemy to charge out. Kalu arranged for 2 bodyguards to send the unconscious Wu Ba away. This could be considered the last bloodline that he left for the 1st Cavalry Division. Then he looked up at the sky. It was currently noon. The sun hung high in the sky, emitting a gentle warmth. The sunlight shone on every soldier's body. Kill. After the Kazakh army reorganized the cavalry, they once again charged forward. This time, General Boda personally led the charge. This showed that they were determined to solve this problem in one battle. The battle cries of the opposing cavalry resounded throughout the canyon. Looking from afar, sand and dust filled the sky. There were probably more than 10,000 cavalrymen. Some people said that when there were more than 10,000 cavalrymen, there was no end to them. At this moment, Kalu and the less than 1,000 cavalrymen of the 1st Cavalry Division felt that way. It was like a ferocious beast with its mouth wide open. It made people feel fearful. At this moment, no matter if it was Kalu, the division commander, or the soldiers, their faces didn't change. It was as if they didn't see the approaching danger. Every soldier only tightly gripped the saber in their hands, looking as if they were facing death with equanimity. For the soldiers who had already disregarded life and death, and even had the heart to die, there was no difference whether there were 1,000 or 10,000 enemies. They only knew that they had to use the last of their strength to block the enemy until they were killed and couldn't move anymore. Everyone, hold your sabers and prepare to charge with me. The target was constantly approaching. When it was less than 3 li away, Kalu also raised the sharp saber in his hand, looking like a moth flying into a flame. Kill! The remaining less than 1,000 cavalrymen also raised their sabers at this moment. Every one of them had a serious expression and didn't show the slightest bit of fear. Do, Do. Just as Kalu's saber was about to fall from the air and slash down, a loud bugle suddenly sounded, resounding in the ears of every soldier of the 1st Cavalry Division. This is the retreat signal. Kalu instantly reacted when he heard the bugle. Then, he immediately turned to look at the 2 remaining bugle masters of the 1st Cavalry Division. After confirming that it wasn't them who made the sound, he saw that they had the same doubts as him. Division Commander, this is the retreat signal. After the 2 bugle masters recovered from their shock, they said in unison, "It really is the retreat signal. Retreat." After getting a definite answer, Kalu only hesitated for a moment before shouting loudly. As if he was afraid that the others didn't react quickly enough, he was the first to tighten the reins of his saber and made a gesture of turning around. At this moment, the retreat signal was definitely the main force of the 5-star army. In other words, all the plans were in place, and the 1st Cavalry Division's mission was completed. At this moment, he didn't want to lose any of his cavalry brothers because after going through so many bloody battles, those who could still survive and continue to jump on their horses to kill the enemy would be the best of the best. If he kept one of these people, there would be more elite soldiers in the future. These were all treasures, and they couldn't afford to lose them. Chapter 1296. First, there was the signal to retreat. Next, there was Kalu's movement. Close to 1,000 5-star soldiers all turned their horses around and followed behind Kalu, quickly heading towards the exit of the canyon behind them. At this time, the 10,000 Kazakh riders led by Boda were only a little more than a mile away from them. For a real cavalry, this distance could be reached in about 100 breaths. However, when the 5-star army suddenly retreated and fled, they were caught off guard. Although there were less than 1,000 of them, Boda, who had fought with them for several days, did not underestimate them. In his opinion, the 5-star army was extremely difficult to deal with, as if they were made of iron. However, he did not expect that the bitter battle that he had imagined would not happen. Instead, the enemy had fled. After a moment of hesitation, Boda's face lit up with joy. Did you see that? The 5-star army is also human. They can run away too. Charge! Catch up with them and kill them. Let them know that the sabers in our hands can easily chop off the head of any enemy. The 5-star army's cavalry had always been determined to fight to the last man, no matter what kind of battle they faced. This was different from the battle Boda had imagined. He had always thought that a cavalry battle was a battle of one's fighting spirit. As long as one side suffered too many losses, their fighting spirit would collapse. At that time, it would be time for the victorious side to reap the fruits of their labor. This kind of rule was not practical for the 5-star army. There was no such thing as their fighting spirit collapsing. They would always fight to the last man. Every time he took a step forward, he had to pay a heavy price. But now, the 5-star army had finally fled. At this moment, Boda felt a sense of relief. This was how cavalry should behave. The 5-star army had returned to normal. Boda was overjoyed and shouted loudly as he led the 10,000 cavalry to charge forward. If it was said that the 5-star army that dared to face him head-on would still make him somewhat fearful, then the 5-star army that had lost their morale and only cared about fleeing was simply not worth his attention. He only needed to charge forward and slaughter them. At this point, the outcome of the battle seemed to have been decided. Boda could not help showing a victorious look on his face. Although he had paid a price this time, he had killed at least 7,000 of the 5-star army's cavalrymen. This kind of achievement was enough to make him proud. Everyone else had been defeated by the 5-star army, but he was the only one who had killed so many members of the 5-star army and even chased after them. Wouldn't that make him the most powerful person? When he thought about how many people would look at him in a new light after this battle, the smug look on his face became more and more intense. He seemed to have already seen countless silvers and the best official position waiting for him. Under Boda's command, the 10,000 cavalrymen's morale soared, and they charged even faster. They were getting closer and closer to the 5-star army, which was less than 1,000 soldiers. 1.5 miles, 1 mile, less than 300 meters, Just as they were about to charge forward and kill to their heart's content, Kalu and the rest of the 1st Cavalry Division finally charged out of the canyon. When they walked out of Botion Mound, they saw the new army's main cavalry formation with their bows drawn. Commander! When Kalu saw Commander Su-hee, who was standing in front of the middle corps, his tears flowed out involuntarily. He did not cry when the 2nd Regiment was wiped out. He did not cry when the 3rd Regiment was wiped out. He did not cry when the 4th Regiment was wiped out. He did not cry even when he knew that he was going to die in battle. But now, at the moment when he saw Su-hee after the war, he couldn't stop his tears from flowing out. Su-hee's eyes were red as well. When he saw that the 1st Cavalry Division was left with less than 1,000 cavalrymen, he knew how tragic the battle was. So many good soldiers had died, just like that. As the commander, he naturally felt terrible. However, he knew that this was not the time to reminisce about the past. It was the time for revenge. Commander Ku, quickly go and rest. The military's medical center is already prepared. You are all meritorious soldiers. You must persevere and survive. Now, watch us take revenge for all of you. In this battle, the 1st Cavalry Division had perfectly executed their plan to lure the enemy in. They had been leading the enemy by the nose. Although the losses were not small in the end, it was worth it no matter how one looked at it. Kalu had made a wrong decision before and caused Kalu to lose the position of commander. Now that he had made a great contribution, he should be the first choice when there was an empty position next time. Kalu was indeed exhausted. With such a big burden on his shoulders, he basically hadn't rested for the past few days. In addition to the injuries on his body, although they weren't fatal, if he didn't want to leave any sequelae, a good rest was necessary. He nodded and said, "All right, your subordinate will take his leave." Kalu left, but the real battle had only just begun. Following closely behind the 1st Cavalry Division was Boda and his 10,000 Kazakh cavalrymen. After turning a corner, they finally saw the exit of Batia Mound. Just as the army was thinking about how they could finally go all out, they were greeted by Chongbo of the 4th Cavalry Division of the 3rd Cavalry Division, which had over 8,000 cavalrymen and archers ready to shoot their arrows at any moment. They had been running back and forth for the past few days. In order to make the enemy think that they had really fled, the 4th Cavalry Division had no choice but to leave with the main force. Now that they were finally back, Chongbo was envious of the 1st Cavalry Division's achievements. When it was time for him to perform, he would not be polite. He shouted, "Fire! Fire! Fire!" This shout echoed countless times when it hit the huge rock at the entrance of the canyon. This shout made the 4th Cavalry Division's 5-star Army's archers' eyes spit fire. Their killing intent filled the sky. With this shout, the soldiers of the 4th Cavalry Division loosened their right arms. Immediately, countless arrows shot out from their hands, creating many pleasant whooshing sounds. A dense rain of arrows pierced through the air and smashed into the unprepared Kazakh cavalry. Soon, the sound of soldiers falling off their horses could be heard. From time to time, it was accompanied by cries of pain and alarm. 2 waves of arrows were released. More than 16,000 arrows were shot from afar, like a giant blade falling from the sky. 30% of the Kazakh cavalry vanguard was cut down. Unfortunately, Boda, the general, was also in the range of the arrows. When he turned the corner, he saw countless archers waiting for him. When he saw the neat formation of the 5-star Army soldiers, he knew that something was wrong. However, his opponent did not give him any chance to catch his breath or react. The arrows came at him as if they were free. He only swung his saber to cut down 3 arrows. Then, the 4th arrow hit him in the chest, followed by the 5th, 6th, and 7th arrows. In a short period of time, he fell to the ground like a porcupine. Even until the moment of his death, he still did not understand where the 5-star Army had come from. Also, since the 5-star Army had so many brave soldiers, why were they in such a sorry state when they were chased by him? Was it really that fun to tease him? With the death of Boda, the Kazakh vanguard cavalrymen who had lost their commander and were heavily injured by the arrows immediately turned around and fled like headless flies. Their faces changed drastically, and they were no longer as high-spirited and complacent as they were when they came out of the canyon. Kill. The 2nd Cavalry Division's division commander Bai Kai and the 3rd Cavalry Division's division commander Lei Chuandang, who had been waiting by the side, roared. More than 10,000 cavalrymen charged into the canyon. The 2 cavalry divisions that had been holding back finally had a chance to use their skills. At this time, they could not wait to charge into the enemy's cavalrymen. They waved their sabers and killed in all directions. One chased while the other fled. In just a short period of time, everyone had changed their roles. The only difference was that the Kazakh cavalrymen were really fleeing. Moreover, they were fleeing with a goal in mind. They thought that once they could meet up with the main force, they could change the situation of being chased by the enemy. However, they did not know that the current situation of the main force was not much better than theirs. In fact, it was even worse. When the agreed time of attack arrived, Yang Qindong, who had been hiding above the canyon, gave the order to attack. It was above the canyon that Yang Qindong saw the bravery of a new army's 1st Cavalry Division with his own eyes. However, he did not move. This was not because Yang Qindong was cold-blooded. Instead, it was because he knew that impatience in small matters would spoil great plans. If they attacked now, they could help the 1st Cavalry Division suppress the enemy. However, before the 1st Cavalry Division was in position and sealed off the enemy's escape route, doing so would only cause the Kazakh cavalrymen to become vigilant. If that happened, the plan of cutting off the enemy's head, waist, and tail would be ruined. This was something that Yang Qindong absolutely could not allow to happen. He could only watch all of this happen and hope that the 1st Cavalry Division could survive this cruel and bloody battle. Fortunately, the 1st Cavalry Division was 16 hours ahead of schedule. This gave the 1st Cavalry Division a ray of hope. Although the losses were disastrous, there were still close to 1,000 cavalrymen who survived. With these 1,000 cavalrymen as the backbone, presumably the day when the 1st Cavalry Division was reorganized and restored to fighting strength would not be too far away. Seeing his own soldiers being bullied, Yang Qindong could finally retaliate. How could he be polite? Under his orders, the rocks piled up above the canyon tumbled down, disrupting the Kazakh army's formation. Then, 10,000 guns were fired. Under the muzzles of the 3 cold vanguard divisions, bullets flew out. The enemy cavalrymen were like living targets, becoming targets. In an instant, they were shot into a hornet's nest. One by one, they fell from their horses. Chapter 1297. Using the 95 style to attack a group of saber-wielding cavalrymen from a high vantage point, occupying the most advantageous terrain. This was indeed bullying. However, war would not stop just because it was unfair. Here, there was only victory and defeat, only the strong and the weak. There was no reason to speak of. It was rare for them to participate in such a large-scale military operation. The soldiers of the 4th Army Division were extremely excited. As the 3 regimental commanders, they were also extremely excited. They quickly changed from shooting at the soldiers to shooting at the enemy generals. One by one, the Kazakh cavalry's Kiliarchs and Centurions were shot through by the bullets and fell off their horses. The sound of gunfire fell on the Kazakh cavalry, taking away one terrifying blood after another. This caused Keliai's face to turn from white to black and his body to tremble incessantly. He was just a descendant of the Mongols. He thought that cavalry was the best in the world and that with a saber and a strong horse, he could gallop through the world. When had he ever seen such a battle before? When the sound of firecrackers echoed in his ears, one by one, the cavalrymen fell off their horses and died without a doubt. This is the firearmed soldiers that people speak of? How can they be so powerful? When did they appear beside us? Who can tell me? Under the protection of his personal guards, Keliai was not in danger for the time being. However, when he saw his subordinates dying one after another from time to time, his face was filled with shock and fear. He did not know when he would be like the other soldiers and be shot to death. No one could answer Keliai's question. Many of the superstitious Kazakh cavalry had already regarded the 5-star army as a godly existence. Think about it. If it was not a godly existence, how could they suddenly appear here? If it was not a godly existence, how could they have such a long range and powerful firearm? General, what should we do? What should we do? The two captains beside Kellei said in a sobbing voice. In the face of such a long range and powerful firearm, they did not have the slightest ability to fight back. This kind of weapon had already exceeded their imagination. It brought them nothing but fear. Their fighting spirit and morale had already fallen to the extreme. When a person wielding a broadsword is facing a submachine gun, even if you have 1,000 skills, it would be difficult to use them, right? At this moment, these Kazakh cavalry had such mentality. When their fighting spirit had collapsed, they didn't think about how to rush up the canyon. In fact, they didn't have the ability to face the 95 style. The only thing he could do now was to think of a way to escape this hell on earth. What to do? Of course, it was to rush out, but Kellei hadn't decided whether to rush forward or retreat. But soon, someone helped him make the decision. The vanguard fled back. Not only that, there were 2 divisions of 5-star army soldiers behind them. Once he heard that the road ahead was blocked, Kellei did not hesitate and immediately gave the order to retreat. At this moment, he didn't care whether or not this would cause him to trample. He also didn't want to do this. He only wanted to leave this place and get away from the 5-star army. He wanted to get away from death and danger. Finally, there was an order. Although the battlefield was very chaotic, at least there was a direction. The Kazakh cavalry were like a monstrous flood. They finally found an opening to break the dam and quickly retreated. In the process of retreating, under the chaotic situation, who knew how many incidents of infighting occurred? It wasn't just trampling. Sometimes, some cavalry felt that others were blocking their escape route. They felt that others were blocking the way, so they would cut them with their broadswords. It was really like opening a path when you meet a mountain, building a bridge when you meet a river. Below the bugle call, standing on the canyon, Yang Chundong looked coldly at everything that was happening in front of him, especially when he saw that the 2 divisions of New Army's cavalry were forced to stop because of the gunshots and were unable to charge into the Kazakh army. He finally gave the order to charge. Immediately, the gunshots stopped and the loud bugle call sounded. The New Army's cavalry instantly moved and killed their way into the battlefield. As they charged, they shouted loudly, "Those who surrender can live. Those who resist must die." The Kazakh cavalrymen, who had already lost their composure and were scared out of their wits, felt as if they had heard the sound of nature. One by one, they threw down the weapons in their hands, jumped off their war horses, and knelt on the ground. The hellish situation was finally coming to an end. Who knew how many cavalry soldiers let out a long sigh of relief? "Commander Ling, bring the warriors down to receive the captives." Now that the situation was settled, Yang Chindong's expression was somewhat relaxed as he spoke to Commander Ling Daqian. Then, Yang Chindong turned around and looked at Beta Persei and the 2 captains Qiu Vi and Dao Xiao who were eager to fight. His face revealed a trace of a smile as he said, "Black cavalry, get on your horses and charge with this king. Kill." Finally, they had a chance to show off their might. The 2,000 black cavalry soldiers excitedly put on their black helmets and black armor. One by one, they raised their sabers and followed Yang Chindong, who was wearing a golden battle robe, towards the entrance of Batian Mound. At this moment, at the entrance, the battle had already begun. With the 1st Cavalry Division's commander, Tian Hu, leading more than 18,000 cavalrymen, they had already launched an attack in half an hour. The rear of the army was mainly responsible for transporting rations and supplies. Although they had previously promised the Kazakh army that the 3 provinces would be supplied by the Kazakh army, this time, Kellei had brought a lot of rations from his own country. When he returned, he only needed to ask the other side for the rations. Otherwise, wouldn't he be unable to see the main forces of the 3 countries and not obtain the rations that the army needed? It was precisely because he had brought a lot of provisions that Kellei had arranged for 5,000 elite cavalrymen to guard the rear army. With the existence of these cavalrymen, even if they were attacked, there wouldn't be any problems. As long as they resisted for a while, his main army would quickly come back to help. Everything was arranged well, but when the opponent was the 1st Cavalry Division, this so-called no problem became a big problem. In front of the 1st Cavalry Division, there wasn't a single cavalry unit that couldn't be destroyed. They didn't even use the Big Dipper crossbow, just relying on their strong bows. When the 1st Cavalry Division appeared, they shot 4 arrows in a row. Here, it should be noted that after an ordinary cavalry launched an attack, they would only be able to fire 2 arrows before involuntarily receiving the enemy's attacks. It was already very difficult for the stronger cavalrymen to shoot 3 arrows. However, in the 1st Cavalry Division, they could shoot 4 arrows in a row within a short distance of 100 meters. There were even some who were more powerful who could shoot 5 arrows in a row. With so many arrows flying through the air, the arrows didn't stop after seeing the cavalrymen. After 4 rounds of arrows, at least a third of the 5,000 cavalrymen were killed, and a third of them were injured and couldn't continue fighting. When there were only 1,000 or so cavalrymen left, facing the charge of the 1st Cavalry Division, they were defeated before they could even cause a ripple. A huge opening appeared on the battlefield, allowing the 5-star Army's cavalrymen to pass through. When Yang Qindong arrived with 2,000 black cavalry, he saw the Kazakh cavalrymen lying on the ground, as well as a few soldiers of the 1st Cavalry Division cleaning the battlefield, watching and counting the captives. "You come here." Beta Persei's eyes widened. He pointed to an officer with the rank of captain and asked, "What's going on here? Where's your division commander?" The soldiers who could become the cavalry of the number 1 cavalry division in the world were all 1 in 100 or even 1,000 in the army. To be able to become a company commander, it was unknown how many bloody battles they had experienced and how many meritorious deeds they had achieved. Such a person naturally knew Yang Qindong and the Black Cavalry. When he saw that the person who greeted him was Beta Persei, Bugnam of Gojoseon's personal guard, he quickly trotted over and saluted. "Report, we are cleaning the battlefield and counting the captives and supplies. Our division commander has already led the army in." Beta Persei, who had long expected this result, couldn't help but ask anxiously, "How long has it been?" "It's been nearly half an hour." As an officer of the 5-star Army, he was used to the saying of 24 hours. When he reported, he naturally answered with such a rule. "Hiss." Beta Persei sucked in a breath of cold air, his face a little bitter. "It's been half an hour, this Tian whose speed is really fast. Young master, what do you think? Let's catch up." Yang Qindong also knew that his idea of participating in a big battle was probably going to be dashed, but since he came, how could he return empty-handed? He had to go to the battlefield to take a look. "Yes, let's go." At that moment, the 2,000 black cavalry rushed straight ahead, leaving behind billowing smoke and dust. At this moment, on the battlefield, one side was completely overwhelming the other side. Under the protection of his personal guards, Clay finally managed to escape from the center of the army. Just as he had a glimmer of hope, he quickly lost all hope. This was because he saw General Toljan, who was supposed to be in charge of the rear army. Thorjan had been chased here by the 1st Cavalry Division with less than 10,000 cavalrymen in the sky. It wasn't that he didn't think of resisting, but when he saw his rear army facing the world's 1st Cavalry Division and couldn't even parry, he knew that this was the elite of the elite. It wasn't something he could handle. He wanted to rush to the center of the army to meet up with General Kelly and use the advantage of numbers to kill his way back. Who would have thought that the situation in the Middle Army was worse than the situation in the Middle Army? When he saw that General Clay only had less than 3,000 to 4,000 cavalry around him, and their formation was in chaos, he knew that things were not going well. Chapter 1298. Why are you here? When Kelly saw General Toljan, his face was also filled with fear. He instantly thought of a possibility, and his heart sank to the bottom. Since the enemy had set up an ambush on both sides of the canyon, why didn't they know to cut off his escape route? It was ridiculous that he thought that going back was the only way out. This was the 5-star Army's plan. However, there was another problem. How did so many 5-star Army soldiers appear here? Didn't the scout report that there were no 5-star Army units around here? The five-star army had only invested a total of over 200,000 soldiers on the battlefield. Shouldn't their main force be on the way to the Forsaken City? Where did the five-star army come from? There were countless questions in his mind, but no one could answer him. Because at this moment, the 1st Cavalry Division and the new army from the front had already surrounded them. He only had about 10,000 cavalry with him, but looking at the cavalry of the five-star army in front and behind him, both groups seemed to have more soldiers than him. Moreover, he was going to be attacked from both sides. It was obvious what the outcome would be. "General, what should we do?" Toljan, who was still holding his saber, couldn't help but ask. He wanted to charge out like a man, but he knew that it was an impulsive action. It was simply suicide. Those who surrender can live. Those who resist must die. The shouts from the front and back were deafening. Tens of thousands of five-star army soldiers roared. The Kazakh cavalrymen who were trapped here trembled. They looked at the front and back and didn't know what to do. What should we do? What else can we do? Surrender. Seeing that the situation was about to change, Kelly let out a long sigh and threw the saber in his hand to the ground. Then he jumped off his horse and squatted down with his hands covering his head. As Kelly took the initiative to dismount and surrender, the cavalrymen around him all followed suit. A battle of 200,000 people ended just like that. From noon to the morning of the 3rd day, around 15,000 Kazakh cavalrymen were killed in less than 24 hours. In the chaos, another 15,000 were trampled and 70,000 were captured. Another great victory appeared. Not only did they completely eliminate 100,000 Kazakh cavalrymen, but they also cleared a large obstacle for the five-star army to take over the entire Ili region. Eliminating 100,000 cavalrymen in 2 days, this speed could only be achieved by the current five-star army. If it wasn't for the fact that there were too many captives, they wouldn't even need to waste this much time. Everyone has worked hard, rest for 2 days. At the same time, send out a regiment from the 1st Cavalry Division, a regiment from the 4th Army Division, and a division from the new army to look after the captives. The most important thing is to change their minds and try to make them useful. Those who surrender will be given priority to join the new army's 1st Cavalry Division. Let's rebuild the platform first. As for what happens next, we might as well stab the rear of the city. It is time to deal with their problem. Yang Qindong's words were shocking. Wiping out 100,000 cavalrymen in one go allowed Yang Qindong to have a better understanding of the strength of an army. He was no longer satisfied with the small victories and set his sights on the 160,000-strong Turpan army. If they were to forcefully attack, even if they could take down the city, the losses would not be small. After all, in the face of so many Turpan soldiers, even if they broke through the city gate, the following street battle would not be so easy. But now was different. He had just captured Kazakh's generals Kelly and Togan. Coincidentally, these two people had participated in the Five-Nation Coalition War before. Many Turpan people knew them. With such a magic weapon in hand, it would be a waste if he didn't make good use of it. Beta Persei, take good care of our two friends. Make sure they are obedient, but make sure they don't get any external injuries on their faces. After Yang Qindong assigned the task to Beta Persei, he led the Black Cavalry and left. If it was someone else who said that they were going to attack Kazakh, the other generals would have some concerns and hesitation. But since it was Yang Qindong who said it, no one doubted it. Everyone thought it was a matter of course. In 2 full days, the political cadres achieved remarkable results. They successfully persuaded more than half of the 40,000 captives to join the Five-Star Army. The rest did not seem to be a problem. Not only did this make up for the original losses, but it also increased the number of soldiers. Beta Persei did not let Yang Qindong down. After a good reception, both Kelly and Togan surrendered. After becoming prisoners, they had no other choice. They could either surrender or die. In the face of life and death, not many people could really not frown. With 40,000 more captives and persuading Kelly and Togan to join him, Yang Qindong knew that the time for the decisive battle had come. He called the generals around him and gave them the next task. In the big tent, Tian Hu, Ling Daqiang, Su He, Kalu, and others had almost rested. At this moment, they were looking at Yang Qindong, who was sitting in the first place with admiring eyes, waiting for the next battle order. Seeing everyone's spirit, Yang Qindong nodded in satisfaction. With so many powerful generals in his hands, what was there to worry about? Announce the order. After the 4 words were spoken, all the military commanders trembled. They puffed out their chests and waited for the order. Order: Kalu's 1st Cavalry Division will be rebuilt from the captives. After it's done, take 30,000 captives who don't surrender to Turpan and hand them over to the 5-star army. They'll be sent to the logistics headquarters in the first city in batches. Many places are undergoing major construction and need a lot of labor. Since these people don't want to bow their heads, they'll serve as laborers. Each of them will be sentenced to at least 20 years. If they perform well, their sentences can be reduced appropriately. Kalu was called out. Although it was a pity that he could not participate in the upcoming battle, escorting so many young and strong captives was also a big deal. Wasn't this the 6th young master's trust in him? He hurriedly agreed. When the other commanders heard that they had to serve for 20 years, they could not help but break out in a cold sweat. That was the most glorious 20 years of a man's life. It could be imagined that they would be little old men after the time was up. They probably wouldn't be able to do anything in life. But on the other hand, who could they blame for this? They dared to not surrender after becoming captives. It was already a good thing that they were not killed. After dealing with the captives, Yang Qindong said for the 2nd time, Order Suhi's new army to take the lead. Escort 30,000 Kazakh captives to the city gate. Try to give a fatal blow to the leadership in the shortest time possible to assist in the upcoming street battles in the city and seize the absolute initiative. Of course, if we can persuade the other party to work for us, that would be the best. Well, Kelly I and Thor Jin can be used by you. Act according to the situation. Yes. Su-hee, who heard the order, quickly responded with a military salute. Although Kalu's 1st Cavalry Division was missing in this battle, there were more than 30,000 captives. In this way, he had more than 50,000 troops in his hands, which made his confidence soar. Order the 4th Army Division and the 1st Cavalry Division to cover the rear. When the new army enters the city and opens the city gate, look for an opportunity to destroy the enemy. Yes, Ling Daqiang and Tian, who both stood at attention and answered. Although they couldn't take the first credit this time, they didn't complain. They all knew that street battles were the most chaotic battles. They didn't want to fight with their elites like this. Yang Qindong must have considered this point and made this decision. As soon as the order was given, the army quickly moved. The officers all carried out their duties, and the army sped up towards Khaleesi City. At the same time, Yang Qindong also notified the 1st Regiment of the 4th Army Division, the Liaodong Cavalry Division, the Far Eastern Army's 1st Cavalry Division, the Light Cavalry Regiment, and the Reconnaissance Regiment that had already conquered Khaleesi City to speed up their march towards Khaleesi City. At that time, they would surround the 4 cities and not let a single enemy escape. A large net was being cast towards Khaleesi City. At this time, King Hardenbarter didn't know about this. The gates of Kuan Sea City, the northern gateway city, were quickly blasted open by the 5-star Army's artillery bombardment. The cavalry took the opportunity to charge in and occupy the city. The king was currently organizing the army in his hands and making the corresponding arrangements for the war. The 5-star Army relied on their powerful cannons to achieve victory. In Hardenbarter's eyes, while at the same time, he was extremely shocked. Regarding this, he specially called his General Daichin to discuss how to deal with this. General Daichin, who thought that he was already familiar with the 5-star Army's tactics, didn't panic. In his view, no matter how strong the tactics were, there was still a way to deal with it. For example, if the same method was used on Khaleesi City, he wasn't that afraid. He had a total of 160,000 soldiers. Although most of them were new recruits, and because of insufficient preparation, many of them only had weapons and didn't even have war horses, it was still 160,000 people. With such a number of soldiers, even if the 5-star Army broke open the city gates, it would still be very difficult for them to enter the city. At that time, they only needed to send the soldiers to the streets to block them. With the geographical advantage, it wasn't impossible for them to fight. Once they held on for too long, when reinforcements appeared, it would be time for them to counterattack. In General Daiqin's eyes, the five-star army wasn't without weaknesses. For example, the lack of manpower was a very important disadvantage. Not to mention 1 versus 1, even 2 versus 1, he believed that in the end, the five-star army would be the one who couldn't hold on. He didn't want to win. He only wanted to protect himself while hurting the five-star army at the same time. Chapter 1299. On this point, King Hardenbarter had the same view. The five-star army, who had a huge appetite, would definitely not lose too many soldiers in Forklift. As long as he could hold on, the five-star army would retreat without attacking. Very good, General Daiqin. I will hand these 160,000 soldiers over to me. You will be in charge of the arrangements in the city in order to deplete the strength of the five-star army to the greatest extent. Yes, I will not disappoint my king. Daiqin cupped his fists and said. He had suffered too many defeats recently, and it was rare for the king to trust him so much. It was time for him to display his strength and let others know that his title as the #1 general of Turpan was not just for show. In reality, Daiqin had some ability, otherwise he wouldn't have been so highly regarded by Hardenbarter. Unfortunately, his opponent was the five-star army. Facing such a huge force, it wasn't possible to rely on a single person to turn the situation around. Daiqin tried his best to arrange for troops to be stationed in the important areas of the city. He only placed a small amount of troops at the city gates. He was a person who knew when to advance and when to retreat. He knew that the city walls of Forklift would not be able to stop the bombardment of the five-star army. At this time, Forklift City was in chaos. Many soldiers used the excuse of defending the important areas to seize the properties and ancestral homes of many rich people. As a result, the commoners complained, and many people had no homes to return to. This was war, and the ones who suffered the most were the commoners at the bottom. Prices rose, safety was not guaranteed, and they lost their jobs. Their goal in life changed from how to live well to how to survive. It was truly a tragedy. Among the many properties that were taken over, 20 to 30 Turfan soldiers rushed into an unassuming silk shop. They used this place as an important reason to force the people here to leave, not allowing them to take any of their belongings. The sudden influx of so many Turfan soldiers holding short knives and spears caused a light to flash in the eyes of the guards in the shop. Their right hand habitually reached for their waist. They all had knives and could fight with the incoming soldiers. Everyone stop, calm down. A woman in a lavender dress with a white veil over her face walked out, escorted by a few maids. She softly stopped the guards from moving, before taking small steps forward to welcome the Turpan soldiers who had barged into the manor. Gentlemen, you are. Her voice was as clear and crisp as an oriole's, and it sounded very pleasant to the ears. This voice attracted the attention of all the Turkmen soldiers. One of the captains at the front had a primitive desire for beauty in his eyes as he strode forward to welcome the newcomer. As he walked, he said, "Oh, there's a beauty here. Ha ha ha. Come, let this lord take a look at your charming little face." As he spoke, he had already arrived in front of the woman. At the same time, he reached out his hand and tore off the white veil. The greater the hope, the greater the disappointment. Perhaps the woman's appearance was too stunning, so the captain had high expectations of her appearance. However, when the white veil was torn off, a face full of black spots appeared before him, causing him to stop in his tracks. Following that, he felt a wave of nausea in his stomach. Clearly, he was disgusted by the ugly appearance of the woman. Not only was her skin dark, there were also black spots on it. She was truly ugly to the extreme. It was hard to imagine how a woman like her could have such a pleasant voice and a decent figure. The woman's appearance frightened the captain. His hand that was hovering in the air quickly dropped. The teasing tone in his voice turned serious. "Are you the manager of this place? Let me tell you, this place has been expropriated. Leave this place immediately. Remember, You're not allowed to take any belongings. Otherwise, don't blame us for not recognizing you with our weapons. Expropriated. The woman put the white veil back on her face, completely concealing her shock. After she regained her composure, she nodded and said, "So that's how it is. Then we are only bringing some clothes to change into. Is that okay? You also know that we women always like to be beautiful." As the woman spoke, a piece of silver appeared in her sleeve and handed it to the captain. When he heard the woman say that she liked to be beautiful, the captain wanted to vomit. If it wasn't for the sake of the silver, he was afraid that he would have already flung her away. But since he had received the benefits, he had to do something. "Okay, hurry up. You can only pack some clothes. You are not allowed to take anything valuable." "Okay, we will listen to you." The woman quickly nodded, then turned around and said to the 4 women who followed her, "Go, pack a little. Sigh, I don't know when these days will end and where we will live." The women moved quickly. After a while, each of them came out with a cloth bag. Seeing how weak they were and how easy it was for them to carry the cloth bag, the captain knew that there was nothing valuable in it. He immediately waved his hand, and without even checking, he said, "Okay, you have taken the things. Quickly leave." "Yes, sir." After the ugly woman bowed, she led the 4 maids and 4 guards out of the silk shop. When they reached the main street, they saw many homeless commoners and merchants just like them. Among them, there was no lack of people who were crying and wailing. The homes they relied on for survival had been occupied, and their wealth had been plundered clean. There were even some who had slightly beautiful women in their homes who had been snatched away. If there was any resistance, those soldiers would brandish their swords and kill them mercilessly. The various scenes that happened made the commoners feel as if the sky was falling and the earth was sinking. At this moment, other than crying loudly on the streets outside their homes, they seemed to be unable to do anything else. "Sister Nien, it seems like they didn't come for us. We were just caught in the crossfire." After coming out and seeing what was happening outside, one of the maids said in a low voice. The so-called Sister Nien was the ugly woman wearing a white veil. Her full name was Sun Nien. Of course, the so-called silk shop and the face that made people not want to see a second time were all a disguise. She was still very beautiful. After all, to be selected by the CIA and become a team leader, she had to pass the test in terms of beauty first. Yes, these Turpan soldiers have all gone crazy. How can the city not be in chaos when they treat the people like this? How can the country not be destroyed? Sister Nien shook her head. Then she asked in a low voice, "Did you bring everything out?" "We brought everything out. We took apart the radio and held it in our hands. It was a close call just now. If they really wanted to search the package, I'm afraid we would have to fight." The guard who was asked was also a member of the CIA. He said with lingering fear, "It's good that you brought it out." Sister Nien nodded. If they really had to fight to the death just now, she wouldn't have been worried. The 8 of them had all undergone professional training. Under a sudden attack, 20 to 30 ordinary Turpan soldiers wouldn't be a match for them. However, that would easily expose their identities. Since they were out, of course they couldn't go back. After thinking for a moment, she said, "Let's go to the 4th safe house. Then report this matter and wait for orders." The so-called 4th safe house was a residence of the rich and powerful in the city. Normally, they wouldn't go there because the security there was tight and it was inconvenient to move around. However, it was the only place where they wouldn't be harassed. It was the safest place. Sister Nien brought the 8 people to the 4th safe house. The radio was quickly set up. Then they contacted their superiors and received new orders. Seeing this order that had to be completed, Sun Nien was a little shocked. This mission wasn't easy to complete. Even if they wanted to complete it, they would lose a lot of people. However, when she saw that it was the 6th young master's order, she didn't hesitate at all, even if it was Yang Chendong's order. So what if all of them were to be sacrificed? Go and inform all the team members in the city to come here for a meeting. There's an important mission. Sun Yin said to her subordinates in an excited voice. The city was in chaos. Cries and screams could be heard everywhere. However, the people in power in Turpan didn't care about this at all. Compared to the suffering of the people, They cared more about their own safety. Especially when they found out that the main force of the five-star army had arrived at the North Gate and could attack at any time, many of the officials couldn't sit still. They didn't know if they could defend the city this time. Could they stop the five-star army? Just when everyone was worried, a piece of good news came into the city. The 100,000 Kazakh cavalry reinforcements had arrived outside the city. They had already appeared at the South Gate. It was said that the General Daichin had already brought people to welcome them. Aya, the heavens bless us. After finding out that there were 100,000 reinforcements, many of the Turpan officials in the city were very happy. In their view, with the help of these 100,000 cavalrymen, they would have more confidence in defending Forkai's city. At this moment, outside the South City, General Daichin was thinking the same thing. When he learned that the Kazakh cavalry had arrived outside the city, he immediately reported the news to the king. If it wasn't for the chaos in the city, the king of Hadenbar would have personally come out to greet them. General Daichin came to Kellyai with a face full of joy. He stretched out his arms and gave Kellyai a warm hug. To him, the appearance of the 100,000 Kazakh cavalry was like a ray of light in the dark night. It was the hope that they could persevere. Chapter 1300. Perhaps because he was too excited, Daichin didn't notice Kellyai's ugly expression until he hugged him and felt his body stiffen. He then asked in surprise, "General Kellyai, are you not feeling well?" Kellyai bitterly smiled. He wanted to say that he was no longer a general, but a captive. However, he knew that there was a gun pointed at him from the side. He had seen the power of a gun before. Taking his life within 30 meters was as easy as stepping on an ant. Not to mention that the two people in charge of monitoring him were less than 10 meters away from him. He definitely didn't dare to gamble and didn't want to die. If he didn't want to die, then he had to follow the five-star army's request. Kellyai could only bitterly say, "General Daichin, I don't know if it's convenient, but I have something to say to you." It was this sentence that made Daichin, who had a trace of doubt, let down his guard. He thought that Kellyai had something that he couldn't say, which was why his expression wasn't good. Considering that Kellyai was here to help him, if there was a problem, he should help him. Thus, he nodded and said, "Of course it's convenient. We are friends, so we can talk about anything." Okay. Kellyai was waiting for this sentence. After he finished speaking, he turned around and said, "If that's the case, then please follow me. What I want to say is confidential, and I don't want too many people to know." Facing Kellyai's request, Daichin didn't think too much. He only thought that Kellyai was talking about conditions. After all, this was the help of 100,000 cavalry. If it was him, he would also make some requests. Thus, he only brought a few people and followed Kellyai to the side of the cavalry army. When he walked in, Daichin noticed that there was a group of people waiting for him. Among them was an old acquaintance, Kazakh's General Toljan. It was because of this person's existence that he didn't think too much and continued to walk behind Kellyai. General Daichin thought that he still had a long way to go, but Haliyi suddenly stopped and turned around with a bitter smile on his face. But this time, he didn't say anything. Instead, someone beside him spoke, "General Daichin, I didn't think that we would meet here. How have you been?" The person who spoke was the commander of the new army, Suhi. With regards to this person, Daichin naturally had a deep impression of him. Thinking back to the time when he brought his army to fight against him, he was defeated. That was the greatest humiliation to him. He curiously looked at the other party and didn't say anything. Hundreds of thoughts flashed through his mind. How could this person be so similar to the commander of the five-star army? Without an answer, Daichin turned his gaze to Haliyi. Clearly, he wanted an answer. Why would the Kazakh cavalry walk together with a general of the five-star army? Seeing that Daichin wanted to hear an explanation or an introduction, Haliyi reluctantly said, "Then let me introduce you. This is General Suhi. He is the commander of the new army of the five-star army." After saying this, Haliyi hurriedly moved his head to the side. Clearly, this betrayal of an ally made him very embarrassed. If possible, he wanted to find a hole to hide in. Hearing the introduction, General Daiqin saw that the other party was indeed the commander of the new army of the five-star army. His expression changed, and his right hand habitually reached for his waist. Clearly, he had already felt the existence of danger. Unfortunately, it was already too late for him to react. Military Commander Su He's guards, who had been observing all this from the side, stepped forward first. Two of them restrained Daiqin from the left and right, pressing down on his shoulders so that his body couldn't move. At the same time, the bodyguards behind him were also restrained. All of this was done silently. Because it was far from the Turpan army, it didn't attract anyone's attention. Suddenly being restrained, General Daiqin's face was naturally filled with anger. He looked at Halier, who had just turned around and scolded loudly. "Halier, I trusted you so much. You actually surrendered to the five-star army. You coward you enough." So he said with a look of disdain. Then he looked at the furious Daiqin and said, "Wanting to live isn't about being afraid of death. It's about seeing if there's any meaning in dying. Come, bring him here." After Suhi's words, a man who looked like a housekeeper was escorted over from the crowd. This was an old man over 50 years old. His appearance was nothing special, but when he appeared in Daiqin's eyes, it really made him pale with fright. He didn't have time to scold Halai and asked nervously, "Housekeeper, why are you here?" The person who came was Daiqin's housekeeper. He had followed Daiqin for tens of years and could be said to be his most trusted person. For him to appear here really surprised Daiqin. But very quickly, his face changed again and again. He suddenly thought of something. As expected, after seeing Daiqin, the old housekeeper cried painfully and said, "Master, madam, young general and the ladies were all captured by them. You have to make a decision." After hearing this, Daiqin's whole body shook. He then used all of his strength to try and break free. It was just that the five-star army was already prepared, and this strength was quickly suppressed. Unable to break free, Daiqin could only curse, "You bastards, if you dare to hurt a single hair of my family, I swear I will take your lives." Daiqin was still shouting, looking like he was about to fight to the death. Suhi, who had already expected this, wasn't in a hurry. After a while, when the other party seemed to have vented enough and was about to use up all of his strength, he said, "Your family is naturally very safe and well protected. But whether or not they will be safe will depend on General Daiqin's choice. If you still want to work for the hardened Bartle that is about to be destroyed, then you have no one to blame." Threat. It was a blatant threat. On the battlefield, in order to win, one would do anything, not to mention against a foreign race. When Suhi was ordered to do this, he didn't feel any pressure at all. Now that the words had been spoken, all that was left was for General Daiqin to make his own choice. He was tired of scolding and shouting. At this moment, Daiqin finally calmed down. But from his undulating chest, he seemed to be struggling and didn't have the intention to make a decision. You are so stubborn." So he was determined to help him make a decision. "General Daiqin, you are a good man, but your actions are really disgraceful. Think about it. You first betrayed the old king Jia Shi and helped hardened Bartle take the throne. Now that the old king is dead, are you worthy of him? Also, everyone says you are a person who loves your soldiers like your children. Are you willing to watch your brothers make unnecessary sacrifices? Think about the citizens in the city. Most of them are homeless and have no food to eat. Every day you delay, who knows how many people will die because of various reasons. Although you are not the main culprit, you are an important accomplice. May I ask, who are you worthy of? When you die one day, will you have the face to face those who died unjustly?" Every word landed on Daiqin's heart, causing his expression to change again and again. Very quickly, he was like a deflated balloon, unable to be as stubborn as before. Thinking about his actions recently, it was really as Suhi said. He was not a good man. How did he become a person who had no king, no father, no brothers, and no citizens? Suhi also saw Daiqin's thoughtful expression and knew there was hope. He continued, "People say that if you know you are wrong, you should change. As long as you turn back now, it is not too late. Because you made the right choice, I believe many people will thank you. This is also your only chance to redeem yourself. Where to go? Quickly make your choice. The group had been delayed here for a while, and it was inevitable that people would think too much. What they needed to do now was to end this quickly. If Daichin cooperated with him, that would be the best. But if he didn't, then they would just kill their way into the city. The only difference was that it would take more effort and more people would die. Sui's words were like a hammer that smashed heavily on Daichin's chest. Finally, after some hesitation, he made the decision to cooperate. Okay, I'm willing to cooperate with the 5-star army, but I hope you won't start a massacre in the city. Finally agreeing, Sui let out a sigh of relief and nodded. General Daichin, please don't worry about this. We won't harm the citizens. After all, these people will become Yangtze citizens in the future. As for the soldiers in the city, as long as they don't resist, we promise we won't do anything to them. Okay. Hearing this promise, Daichin's face revealed a relieved expression. Maybe Sui was right. What he was going to do now was to redeem himself for his previous mistakes. Since Daichin agreed to cooperate, the next step was naturally much easier. He first gathered all the generals under him and started to persuade them to surrender under the encirclement of the new army of the 5-star army. Daichin really treated his subordinates well. After he revealed his intentions, and with the deterrence of the 5-star army, no one objected and everyone agreed to follow the general's decision. This was something that couldn't be helped. The 5-star army had already killed their way into the city. At this time, there was no point in resisting. Instead, they would sacrifice their own lives. And this kind of meaningless sacrifice was something no one was willing to do. Chapter 1301. With the cooperation of the generals under Daichin Yu, the 5-star army quickly entered the city. Following the request, all the Turfan soldiers who agreed to enter had a red rope tied around their right arm, as a sign of distinction. Then, the army entered the city. Along the way, no one stopped them, and no one came to stop them. This didn't mean that the situation was settled. Because Daichin was riding at the front, many soldiers didn't know what was going on. Furthermore, the military power of Turpan wasn't completely in Daichin's hands. The tiger seal was still in the hands of King Hardenbarter. If they didn't convince him, the problem wouldn't be solved. Daichin, who also knew this, unexpectedly volunteered to enter the temporary palace to see Hardenbarter. He wanted to persuade him. This was also the best way he could redeem himself. This idea was good, but Sui didn't think highly of this mission, especially when he thought about what Yang Qindong told him before they came. In Turpan, anyone could surrender except for King Hardenbarter. To others, surrendering was just a transfer from one faction to another. Perhaps their position would be demoted, but they would still have to listen to someone else's orders. But to their masters, it was completely different. They would fall from their high position and become prisoners. This was something that was hard to accept. General Daichin, your idea is good, but how confident are you in convincing Hardenbarter? Sui asked the question in front of everyone. As expected, Daichin revealed a troubled expression. He then said, 30%. 30%? That won't do. That's too low. You're just sending yourself to death. Hearing this answer, Sui immediately rejected. Now, Daichin was his captive. Since he was his captive, he had the right and responsibility to ensure his safety. Daichin wasn't angry that his request was rejected. Instead, he was happy. This proved that Daichin cared about him. This touched him a little, but because of this, he decided to do this. This was his way of returning the favor. General Su, please agree to my request. This is indeed a bit risky, but if it succeeds, the benefits will be great. The hundreds of thousands of soldiers in the city will no longer have to suffer the pain of war, and the people will be able to live a peaceful life again. It's just a risk, but it's worth it. What Daichin said made sense. Sui hesitated for a moment. Since he was going to be the vanguard, he naturally hoped to complete the task beautifully. By the time the 6th young master arrived, all the problems would have been solved. What kind of contribution would that be? Seeing that Sui didn't immediately reject him, Daichin felt that there was hope. He hurriedly said, General Su, I will do my best to ensure my own safety. I will use the excuse of welcoming General Kelly to bring some soldiers into the temporary palace. General Su can also send some five-star army to follow. If it really doesn't work, we can still retreat. This wasn't a bad idea. So he thought about it for a moment before nodding in agreement. No matter what, if there was a chance, it was worth a try. If worst came to worst, he could just leave the palace. With his new army already in Khaleesi City, he definitely had the ability to provide support outside the palace. Just like that, the two quickly discussed some things. At the same time, they also convinced General Toljan of Kazakh to represent Kelly and follow Daichin into the temporary palace. This way, not only could they bring more soldiers, they could also look after each other. To ensure everyone's safety, he gathered 200 new army warriors and gave them to Lei Chuandang, the commander of the 3rd Cavalry Division. Commander Lei, it would be best if this succeeds. If it doesn't, you must protect the safety of the two generals. I will bring the army to provide support outside the palace. Rest assured, I will complete the mission. After the tall and mighty Lei Chuandang gave a military salute, he took off his 5-star army uniform and changed into the uniform of the Kazakh soldiers. After everything was prepared, under Daichin's familiar guidance, he brought 50 guards, plus Lei Chuandang and Toljan's 200 guards, a total of 253 people to the temporary palace of the Turpan Kingdom. A king was a king. Even if the donkey didn't fall, it wouldn't fall. Even though Turpan had already lost a large amount of land and people, and even their country, after arriving in Khaleesi, under Hardenbarter's orders, they quickly built a new palace. Even though it wasn't as glorious as before due to the lack of time, it still took up a lot of space. Just from the outside, they had to go through 3 gates and 3 checks before they could enter. With Daichin leading the way, they were naturally unobstructed. At this moment, in the palace hall, King Hardenbarter was waiting to meet with Kelly. Beside Hardenbarter, Generals Tushi and Jingel stood on the left and right. From time to time, they would stretch their necks and look outside the hall. Clearly, they were a bit anxious. What's going on? Didn't you say that everyone was here? Why isn't he here yet? Finally, Hardenbarter's eyes showed a trace of annoyance. No matter what, he was still the king of country. Even though Kelly came to help him, it wasn't right to make him wait for so long. Seeing that the king's tone was a bit unhappy, the 2 generals on the side lowered their heads and didn't dare to make sound. This new king was not as good-tempered as the old King Siza, especially now that the army was constantly retreating. Just yesterday, one of his servants was dragged out to be beheaded because he accidentally broke a piece of porcelain. With this as an example, everyone had to be more careful. No one answered his question, so Kelly coldly snorted. He didn't want to cause trouble for the 2 generals. After all, he still needed them to defend the city. After waiting for a while, when Hardenbarter's face showed his annoyance again, a palace servant finally ran in and knelt on the ground. Your Majesty, General Daichin is back. Together with him is General Toljan of the Kazakh Kingdom. Finally, they're here. Hardenbarter quickly sat up straight. At the same time, he was a bit confused. Didn't Kelly come? Why didn't he come to see me? With this question in mind, when Daichin and Toljan entered the heavily guarded hall, Hardenbarter asked, "Why don't I see General Kelly?" Toljan, who had long prepared his speech, put his right hand in front of his chest and maintained his customary etiquette. Honorable King of Turpan, our General Kelly caught a cold and is now resting in the army. After saying this, Thorjin shut his mouth. Then he looked around and began to observe the environment in the hall. When he saw 8 armored turban soldiers around the hall and 2 tiger generals beside King Hardenbarth, he knew that it was impossible to use the strategy of capturing the leader first to catch the bandits. Now, he could only find an opportunity to rush out after Daichin said what he wanted. Luckily, Lei Chuan led more than 200 warriors outside the hall to support him. As long as he was fast enough, there shouldn't be any danger. As for whether General Daichin's persuasion would succeed, he didn't have any hope. Toljan closed his mouth, and it was Daichin's turn to speak. He needed to find an excuse for being late, so he said, Your Majesty, General Kellii is indeed not feeling well. Luckily, I've already asked after him on behalf of Your Majesty. Please forgive me for being late. I see. Everything is right. Hardenbarter nodded without thinking too much. Soon, he asked what he wanted to ask. Is General Kellii all right? It won't affect our cooperation to deal with the 5 Stars Army, right? At this moment, Daichin had a headache because of this question. Now that the 5-star army had already entered the city, the destruction of Turban was inevitable. The only difference was that fewer soldiers and civilians would die. This was also the reason why he had to make this trip. He wanted to use his own efforts to protect the lives of more soldiers and civilians, thinking that because of his actions, he might be able to save a lot of people. He gathered his courage and said to Hardenbarter, Your Majesty, do you think that even if we join forces with the 100,000 Kazakh soldiers, we can really stop the powerful 5-star army? Just as he was waiting for a definite answer, Daichin suddenly said this. Hardenbarter's expression changed again and again. He didn't understand why this important official would say such a thing. Of course, he couldn't answer this question, but did he have a choice? General Daichin, what do you mean? Do you not think that our 2 armies can work together? Hardenbarter didn't understand and asked back. He didn't think that Daichin would answer this question very straightforwardly. Yes, Your Majesty, I don't think so. In my opinion, even if we join forces with General Kellii, we won't be able to change the situation. If we do that, we will just be throwing away the lives of innocent soldiers and civilians. The sudden answer stunned Tushi and General Jingel, who were standing on both sides of the room. They didn't think that their subordinate General Daichin would see the situation in front of them like this. Although they were also terrified of the arrival of the 5-star army and didn't have much confidence in winning, they shouldn't be so pessimistic. Hardenbarter, who was sitting on the throne, also had his eyes wide open. After a few breaths, his chest heaved as he asked, Daichin, what do you mean by that? Are you going to surrender to the 5-star army? It was no wonder that Hardenbarter would think like this. This was too obvious a discussion about surrendering to the enemy. Anyone else would think too much. Chapter 1302. Of course, Hardenbarter didn't doubt Daichin's loyalty. After all, during this period of time, this person had been supporting him. If this person had already surrendered to the 5-star army, the situation would have been much worse. Hardenbarter didn't doubt Daichin. He just said this out of anger. But after he said this, what he didn't expect was that Daichin actually admitted to it. He first nodded and then said with a very certain tone, Yes, Your Majesty, your servant has already surrendered to the 5-star army. Now, the 5-star army has already disguised themselves as the Kazakh army and entered the city. This time, your servant came to persuade Your Majesty to surrender. Please don't fight for the sake of the soldiers and the people. Otherwise, you will only lose more miserably and even lose your life. As if he was afraid that Hardenbarter wouldn't give him a chance to speak, Daichin spoke very quickly and clearly. He could guarantee that he would say everything he wanted to say in a very short period of time. Hardenbarter could also hear it very clearly. This was also a test for people. And with every sentence that Daichin said, Hardenbarter's face became more and more ugly. When Daichin finished speaking, his face was already as gloomy as water. His murderous eyes stared at Daichin again and again as if he wanted to get to know this person again. Then he suddenly roared, Innocent? How can there be innocent people in a war? Since they are the generals and citizens of Turkmenistan, they should protect this country with this king. If this king is no longer here, there is no need for them to continue living. You, on the other hand, have been put in an important position by this king, but now you are actually helping others. How disappointing. After saying this, Hardenbarter suddenly raised his right hand and pointed at Daichin. You are a person without a king or father. Come, take down this cowardly person for this king. Yes. The 8 palace guards standing on the left and right of the palace immediately responded and rushed towards where Daichin was standing. Just as they started to move, a short wooden table flew over and blocked the path of the Imperial bodyguards. Naturally, it was Thor Jin who did it. He had been observing the environment in the hall and was prepared to make a move at any time. Just as the guards agreed, he stared at the small wooden table that was originally prepared for Kellii. He reached out with both hands, picked it up, and threw it out with force. Taking advantage of the flying wooden table, Thor Jin grabbed Daichin's hand and quickly retreated until he reached the main door of the palace and kicked it open. Two silhouettes also quickly rushed out. "Catch them. We can't let them escape." Seeing that Daichin and the other person were about to escape, Hardenbarter's eyes turned red as if they were spitting fire. Under his shouts, the 8 palace guards rushed out together. At this moment, Lei Chuan, who was in charge of receiving them from outside the palace, was also prepared. The moment he saw Daichin and the other person rush out, he pulled out his sword and slashed towards the palace guard closest to him, who was completely defenseless. As Lei Chuandang made his move, it was like a signal. The dozens of warriors behind him all pulled out their swords and rushed towards different targets. In an instant, blood splashed everywhere, and the palace became a mess. "Let's go." Thor Jin quickly pulled Daichin back to Lei Chuandong's side and took a sword from him, holding it horizontally in front of him as he yelled. Lei Chuandang didn't need Thor Jin to say anything to know that they couldn't stay here any longer, because in his vision, there were already countless guards rushing towards them. He slashed forward with his sword and pushed back a palace guard. At the same time, he shouted to all his subordinates, "Retreat, kill a path of blood. Kill." The dozens of warriors said in unison. Then, they turned around and retreated according to the path they came from. At this moment, not only in the courtyard, but also at the 3 gates of the palace, it was already a mess. Along the way, Lei Chuandong's group had more than 100 brothers at the gates of the top 3 academies. There were exactly 60 people at each intersection. When chaos broke out in the palace, these 180 warriors immediately pulled out their blades and slashed at the palace guards beside them. Taking advantage of the chaos, Lei Chuan and his men charged out of the courtyard and arrived in front of the first gate. They met up with the soldiers of the 5-star army and continued to charge out. With every step they took, someone would fall beside them. With every step they took, there would be a palace guard who would be killed by a blade. "What are you waiting for? Hurry up and chase after them." Seeing that Daichin still hadn't arrived in front of him, Hardenbarter felt that something was wrong. With a face full of anger, he yelled at Tushi and Jinjel who were standing at the 2 sides. Yes, the 2 generals seemed to have just woken up. They replied loudly and prepared to leave. "Wait." Hardenbarter's yell caused the 2 to involuntarily stop. What did Daichin just say? He said that the 5-star army disguised themselves as Kazakh cavalry and already infiltrated the city? Doesn't this mean that the city is no longer safe? You 2 don't need to chase anymore. This king will give you the Tiger Troop Talisman. Immediately dispatch the troops and kill all the Kazakh cavalry that just entered the city. Hurry. As he spoke, Hardenbarter reached into his pocket and took out 2 Tiger Troop Talismans. He gave them to Tushi and Jinjel. The 2 generals bowed and quickly left after receiving the Tiger Troop Talismans. However, at this moment, Hardenbarter, who was extremely angry, didn't think too much about it. Even if Daichin could betray him, were these 2 generals really that trustworthy? Were they really that loyal? Battle cries rang out from the palace. The 5-star army soldiers who were already prepared outside the palace seemed to have heard a signal. They all shouted loudly and then rushed over with swords and spears. They quickly opened the palace gates and received Lei Chuandang and the others. At this time, the Turpan soldiers who received the news gathered more and more troops to protect their king. "Retreat from here first and regroup with the army at the south gate. We will make a decision then." After Lei Chuandang met up with the soldiers, he immediately gave the order. The group of people quickly left this place. Right after they left, Tushi and Jinjel each brought a group of soldiers and appeared here. However, they didn't have the intention to chase after Daichin. Instead, they split up and went towards the east and west barracks. Tushi really went to mobilize troops. He was once a defeated general, and Hardened Barter didn't abandon him. Naturally, he was very loyal and wanted to show off. However, the other general, Jingel, didn't think so. It wasn't that he wasn't loyal enough. On the contrary, he was very loyal. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been chosen by Daiqin and promoted. Yes, Jingel was the one who was promoted by General Daiqin. It was because of this that he was greatly affected by what happened in the palace just now. According to his understanding, his benefactor, Daiqin, was a reasonable person and a person who loved his soldiers. Since even he thought that he would lose this battle, he had no choice but to think about the future. Everyone was afraid of death, not to mention a meaningless death. Jingel was also afraid of death. However, if it was on the battlefield and his skills were inferior, he would die without regrets. However, if he were to die in such a muddle-headed manner, and even be scolded after his death, such a death was not something he wanted to see. Gegener's footsteps became slower and slower as he walked towards the east camp. After hurriedly passing through 2 more streets, he suddenly stopped and looked at his most trusted bodyguard beside him and asked, Are you afraid of death?" The soldier was stunned by this question. After a moment of hesitation, he immediately shook his head. "General, I'm not afraid of death." "Good, then I'll give you a mission. Go quickly." Lei Chuandang and his group had already retreated to the south gate under the protection of the 5-star army cavalry. There were soldiers of the new army everywhere. Retreating here also meant that they were safe. So he saw how embarrassed they were and knew that persuasion wouldn't work. He shook his head and said, "It seems that your mission has failed. Since it's like this, then we can only fight. General Daiqin, this time you have nothing to say." Daiqin's face was red. He wanted to say something, but the matter of persuading the king had already failed. In order to protect him, he had also lost dozens of 5-star army brothers. At this moment, he really didn't know what to say. Sometimes silence was a kind of silent agreement. General Su, he nodded. "Good. Since it's like this, immediately use the radio to contact the 4th Army Regiment outside the North Gate. Tell them to prepare to bombard the gate and kill our way into the city. When the time comes, we'll kill our way to the north and south." "Yes, sir." After hearing Su He's order, the soldiers immediately responded loudly and turned to leave the tent. At this moment, the tent flap opened and a messenger walked in. He looked at Su He and saluted, then said loudly, "General, there's a Turpan soldier outside the tent. He says he's Jingel's soldier and has important matters to discuss with General Daiqin." "Jingel's soldier? Why don't you let him in?" Daiqin said as he looked at Su He with a pleading expression. So he also wanted to see what this person wanted. He nodded and said, "Okay, let him in." Soon, under the guidance of the messenger, a soldier wearing a Turpan uniform walked into the tent. He first looked around, and after seeing General Daiqin, he knelt down and said, "General, our general invites you to his camp. He says he has important matters to discuss." Chapter 1303. Daiqin had some impression of the soldier in front of him and confirmed that he was someone who always followed beside Jingel. After confirming his identity and knowing that he wanted to meet him, Daiqin quickly made a decision. He had already made his intentions very clear in the main hall just now, and Jingel was also present at that time. He already knew of his opinion, and now he still wanted to meet him. What was the meaning of this? Could it be that he agreed with his opinion? Did he call me over this time just to discuss something related to this matter? In just a few breaths of time, Daiqin thought of many things and decided to take the risk. But just as he was about to nod his head, so he had already answered for him. "No, General Daiqin won't go. Who knows if your general is trying to trick us?" Right, you can't go. It's too dangerous." Suhi's words attracted everyone's agreement. This wasn't to say that everyone was trying to curry favor with him because of his high position, but this was what everyone truly thought. "No, I should go." Just when everyone was disagreeing, Daiqin opened his mouth with a determined look on his face. As if he was afraid that others would misunderstand or disagree, Daiqin explained, "This General Jingel is different from the others. He was personally promoted by me, and I know his personality well. He definitely wouldn't do something despicable like lying to others. I think he wants to join us and called me over to discuss something important. Now that I'm no longer around, the military authority of the East and West armies will definitely be given to these people. This is an army of tens of thousands. In order for these people to join the 5-star army, I think this risk is worth taking. Daichin looked at Su He as he spoke, his expression unwavering. Since he had already decided to stop the war and give more soldiers and civilians a way out, then he had to finish the good deed. Even if he had to die, he wouldn't hesitate. Since he had already taken a risk, Su He originally didn't want to agree. After all, Daichin was still of great use. There were 300,000 civilians and 100,000 soldiers in Furakashi City. It was impossible to kill them all. In the end, to pacify these people, the local general had to do the work. No matter if it was in terms of experience or influence, Daichin was the best choice to settle these problems. Once something happened to him, a lot of things would be difficult to do. This was also why Yang Qindong ordered the CIA to spend a lot of effort to control Daichin's family. From the looks of it, the effect was excellent. Not only was this person worried about the safety of his family, but he was also worried about the safety of the soldiers and civilians in the city. That was why he agreed to work for him. At this time, if something were to happen, wouldn't all their previous work be for nothing? At the same time, Sui knew that Daichin's words made sense. If Jin Gel really wanted to surrender, it would be a pity to give up this opportunity. This meant that not only would they not have the cooperation of tens of thousands of soldiers, they would also have to face tens of thousands more enemies. The difference between the two was too great. Sui was a bit hesitant, but Daichin said firmly, "Commander Su, please give me a chance. Based on my understanding of Jingel, even if he doesn't choose to surrender, he won't threaten my safety. Please believe me." Then, okay, tell everyone to leave. I have something to tell you in private. Sui finally agreed. Even if she agreed, if Jingel also chose to surrender, she would have to give him some benefits and guarantees. This kind of thing was not suitable to be discussed in public. Instead, it needed to be discussed in private. After about 15 minutes, Daichin walked out of the tent and left with the soldier. When he left, he only brought 4 bodyguards with him to protect his own safety. Because if the opponent had any bad intentions, it would be useless no matter how many soldiers he brought. "Commander, what should we do?" Seeing Daichin leave, Lei Chuandang and the rest came to Suhi to ask for instructions. "Let's wait for a while." "Oh, right." Immediately sent a message to the 1st Regiment of the 4th Division to not fire the cannons on the city gate. Wait for our news. Sui decided to believe in Daichin this time. Maybe he would bring back some good news. Even if things didn't work out, they had already entered the city and couldn't be kicked out. At most, they would just kill a few people. After Daichin followed the soldier to the east camp, he saw Jingel waiting for him at the entrance. When he saw that, Daichin not only came, but also only brought 4 soldiers with him. Jingel's face revealed a trace of joy. When they came in front of him, he took the initiative to bow. Subordinate greets General. From Jingel's greeting, one could see his attitude. To this, Daichin also said emotionally, "General, please rise." "Thank you, General." Jingel immediately stood up and said sincerely, "General, please come into the tent for a chat." "Okay, lead the way." Daichin's body had already relaxed. If it was a blessing, it wouldn't be a disaster. If it was a disaster, it couldn't be avoided. Very quickly, the 2 of them entered the tent. When there were only the 2 of them in the tent, Jingel knelt on the ground. "General, I didn't think that you would really come and only bring 4 soldiers with you. Your trust in me makes me feel ashamed and touched. Quickly get up. Speaking of which, I was the one who promoted you. I think I know you well. Speak, this time you brought me here. Do you have something to say?" At this moment, Daichin had already made up his mind. If the other party really wanted to harm him, there was no need for him to kneel now. Daichin went straight to the point. Jingel, who got up, didn't say anything. It was obvious that he was still thinking about how to start. After waiting for a while, Jingel still didn't speak. Daichin knew that he had to say something to increase the stakes. He said, Okay, if you have something to say, then say it quickly. To be honest, the five-star army didn't agree to you coming here. If you don't go back for a long time, I'm afraid that something will happen. At that time, it will be very bad for you. Jingel, who was still hesitating, didn't dare to hesitate anymore. He opened his mouth and said, "General, did the five-star army really enter the city?" Finally, they came to the main topic. Daiqing didn't hide anything and said, "That's right. They destroyed the 100,000 Kazakh cavalry and disguised themselves as them to enter the city. Now, they have already taken over the south gate. We can't beat them away." What? The 100,000 Kazakh army was defeated? It was the first time he heard this news. After hearing it, Jingel's face changed. Speaking of which, the 100,000 reinforcements were the hope of Turpan turning the situation around. He didn't think that even this hope would be destroyed. It seemed that he didn't have any other choice. Yes, I've already seen General Kellyi. Think about it. Even he has become a captive of the five-star army. The fate of the 100,000 reinforcements can be imagined. Daiqing nodded his head heavily, giving a clear answer on this point. After knowing the truth, Jingel knew that the situation had changed. He was even more glad for his decision. Of course, he was also grateful to Daiqing. He originally thought that if he sent out an invitation, Daiqing wouldn't dare to come. If that was the case, then he didn't have any other choice. The only thing he could do was to listen to the king's orders and send out troops. But now, since Daiqing came, he obviously had another choice. "General, what do you think I should do next?" Although his question was a little vague, his words already expressed his thoughts. Daiqing was relieved after hearing it. "Jingel, I've already reported your situation to the new army commander of the five-star army. He arranged it like this." At this moment, Tushi was mobilizing troops in the West Camp. Holding the military seal given by King Hardenbarter, he now had control over 70,000 troops. Originally, he had an army of 160,000. Other than the 5,000 outside the north and south gates, 10,000 inside the city, and 70,000 in the East Camp, the 70,000 in his hand were the most important. When he thought about having such an important military power, General Tushi was very happy. He thought that his chance to show off had come. The opportunity to lose the Battle of Ala Mountain Pass would also appear. But what he didn't expect was that this happiness didn't last for too long. It was interrupted when a scout entered the tent and reported, "General, the latest news, Jingel surrendered to the five-star army and sent people to open the north gate. Right now, the five-star army outside the north gate has already entered the city. A portion of the cavalry is already charging towards our west camp." The scout knelt on the ground and reported anxiously. General Tushi, who was originally happy and wanted to make a big contribution, heard the news, and his expression changed greatly. Jingel's surrender was tantamount to completely overturning the balance of strength on the battlefield, making it difficult for him to see any hope of victory. Now in Firlai City, the enemy had occupied 3 of the 4 cities. Only his west gate was still in his hands. He absolutely couldn't lose it. He couldn't afford to lose it. Like this, let the soldiers withdraw their forces and guard the gate. Don't worry about other places. If anyone wants to approach the west gate, just shoot them with bows and arrows. Also, immediately mobilize a group of troops. I'm going to the palace to pick up His Majesty and leave here immediately." After quickly making a decision, Tushi took a group of 2,000 elite cavalry and went straight to the palace from the west gate. He found King Hardenbarter, who was still sitting there and waiting for news. Time was of the essence. After Tushi saw King Harden, he knelt on the ground and gave a brief introduction of the situation. Then he said loudly, "Your Majesty, Firlai City is no longer safe. For your Majesty's safety, please follow me out of the city to take refuge." Chapter 1304. Jingel had also rebelled. This result struck Hardenbarter like a bolt of lightning. His face was as black as the bottom of a pot. The feeling of being betrayed by his friends and family made him feel like a ball of fire was burning in his heart, and he wanted to vent it. Damn it, they all deserve to die. This king has treated them well. Why did they betray me? General Tushi, why do you think this happened? Hardenbarter, who seemed to be a little neurotic, shouted for a long time. If it was any other time, in the face of the king's anger, Tushi could only kneel at the side and endure. But now, time waits for no one. He could tolerate the king's actions, but his enemies wouldn't. If he waited any longer, once the encirclement was completed, it would be impossible for him to escape. Tushi, who was kneeling on the ground, gritted his teeth and finally did something that shouldn't be done by a subject, but it was the most appropriate action. Come, lift His Majesty up and invite His Majesty out of the palace. This order made the cavalrymen who came with Tushi look at each other. They didn't dare to make any excessive moves in front of the crazy king. Instead, the palace guards approved of this order. They quickly rushed forward and lifted Hardenbarter up and rushed out of the palace. Leaving with them were the concubines of the imperial harem, as well as several young princes and princesses. Half an hour after Tushi left, Commander Su, he led a large number of cavalrymen to the temporary palace. But at this time, the palace was empty and the king was nowhere to be seen. After a careful search, other than some palace maids who were kneeling and trembling in fear, there wasn't a single member of the royal family. General Daichin shook his head regretfully. It seems that His Majesty has left first. Left? Suhi shook his head and said in a very certain tone, "They can't run away. Come, immediately interrogate these palace maids and ask them who took Hardenbarter away." Faced with the fierce-looking, burly, and murderous new Third Army Cavalry, the palace maids naturally answered all the questions. Soon, they told the story of Tushi's appearance here and taking the king away. This was within Su He's expectations. When he heard that the king left, but because he left in a hurry, he left all his belongings in the palace. He called the commander of the 2nd Cavalry Division, Bai Kai, and told him to send a large number of troops to guard the palace. He also reported this matter to Yang Qindong outside the city. Then he said to the commander of the 3rd Cavalry Division, Lei Chuandang, "Immediately lead the army to attack the West Gate. It's best if we can capture Hardenbarter, but if we can't, we have to drive them out of the city. When they get out of the city, there will naturally be people to stop them." In this way, Chongbo of the 4th Cavalry Division attacked from the South Gate. Lei Chuandang attacked from the palace to the West Gate. Jenger's surrendered troops attacked from the East Gate, and the 1st Regiment of the 4th Cavalry Division and the Far Eastern Army Cavalry Division attacked from the North Gate. At this point, apart from the West Gate, most of the city was occupied by the 5-Star Army. At the West Gate, Tushi forcefully took Hardenbarter back to the barracks. At this time, the young king's emotions had also gradually calmed down. Although he still had some doubts in his heart, now was not the time to think about these things. What he had to do next was the most important thing. "General Tushi, what do you plan to do next?" After gradually calming down, Hardenbarter looked at Tushi, who was the last important official by his side, and asked with a hopeful expression, "Your Majesty, I have 2 suggestions. The first is to stay in the city and use Your Majesty's name to fuse with the army to resist. We should strive to regain the command of the city and drive the 5-Star Army out of the city. However, this is not easy to accomplish. The second is to immediately leave the city. Where there is life, there is hope. As long as Your Majesty is still here, you can shake your arm at any time and rebuild the mountains and rivers. As for where we should go, Your Majesty, please make the final decision." Tushi cupped his fist and said carefully, "The first suggestion was definitely a good one. Once the 5-Star Army was chased out of the city, it would be equivalent to resolving a crisis. With the 300,000 citizens in the city, perhaps they would be able to use them to form an army with a decent number of soldiers. However, it was obvious that with Daichin and Jinjel's betrayal and the 5-Star Army's cavalry entering the city, it would be quite difficult to do this. If they did not do it well, they would be trapped here. And from the looks of it, this possibility was very high. Although the second suggestion was to give up a large number of civilians and even soldiers. If they wanted to break out, they couldn't bring too many soldiers. Firstly, they needed to leave people to guard the West Gate. Secondly, if they had too many people, they would be a big target. The chances of them being discovered and caught would also be very high. In this way, it was equivalent to giving up too many things, which made one's heart ache. However, by doing this, they would be able to stay away from danger, and the chances of them rising would also be very high. After a moment of hesitation, Hardenbarter was worthy of being an ambitious king. He quickly made the decision to leave the city like a gecko cutting off its tail. Let's leave the city. Just like the general said, where there is life, there is hope. How about this? You go and make the arrangements. We don't need to bring too many cavalrymen. Only 5,000 elite cavalrymen will be enough. You also arrange for the other 3 groups of 2,000 cavalrymen to go out of the west gate with us. After that, we will go our separate ways to confuse the 5-star army's cavalrymen. Good. Your Majesty is wise. I will go and make the preparations. Tushi sighed at Hardenbarter's cleverness and immediately flattered him. Then, he went to make the preparations. This plan involved selecting soldiers and convincing some generals to stay here. The workload wasn't small. Tushi busied himself for a while and only managed to settle the matter after half an hour. When there were still some details to be completed, a piece of news came which made Tushi unable to sit still. He left the unfinished work and brought the selected 11,000 cavalrymen to Hardenbarter. Your Majesty, there's news from the periphery. A group of cavalrymen from the 5-star army has arrived at the western gate of the city. They're charging towards us right now. We need to leave immediately. Good, is everything done? Hardenbarter naturally knew that there was no time to lose. This time, he didn't go crazy and didn't ask pretentiously. Everything is done. Among the 11,000 cavalry, we will leave 5,000 of the most elite cavalry to protect your Majesty. The remaining 6,000 cavalry will be divided into 3 groups to confuse the enemy. Tushi answered very happily. That's great. Let's go. General Tushi, this king didn't misjudge you. Once this king returns here in the future, there will be many benefits for you. At that time, your entire family will be proud of your choice today. At this moment, Hardenbarter, who could only rely on Tushi, immediately made a heavy promise. In response, a look of excitement flashed across Tushi's face. He knelt down and said, "The Tushi clan is willing to go through fire and water for your Majesty's safety. We are willing to risk our lives for the re-emergence of Tulyafin." Haha, good, we will leave immediately. Hardenbarter laughed heartily. Although there were too many unexpected things this time, no matter what, as long as he could escape, there would be new hope. In this way, the rise of East Mountain wasn't impossible. At that time, he would retaliate against anyone who betrayed him by 10 times or even 100 times. He would let everyone know the consequences of offending him. Hardenbarter. The 11,000 cavalry quickly left the west gate under Tushi's arrangement. When this news reached the ears of the Turpan generals who were arranged to stay behind, many of them couldn't help but curse. After all, even the king and the general had left. They had become rootless trees. Facing the 5-star army coming from all directions, they would only die if they continued to resist. There were also some generals who had a contemplative look after hearing this news. As the saying goes, every man for himself, and the devil takes the hindmost. Even the king and the general had left. They also needed to plan and consider their future. Was it really a wise choice to lead their troops to resist the 5-star army? Tushi couldn't care less about the considerations of these generals. He led 5,000 cavalrymen to protect Hardenbarter, the royal family, and the core members of his family, and quickly left the city. He then waved his hand, and the other 3 groups of 2,000 cavalrymen each left in different directions. At this point, no one knew which direction was safer. The so-called choice was just to resign themselves to fate. However, compared to the other soldiers who stayed in the city to fend off the 5-star army, it was clear that their chances of survival were higher. Looking at the 3 groups of 6,000 cavalry leaving in different directions, Tushi let out a long sigh and loudly issued the order to set off. They followed the previously planned route and went straight to Boston Lake in the west. As long as they could go around the lake, they would be able to enter the vast Kuruktag mountain range. Once they entered, they would be like birds flying in the sky. It would be difficult to find them. After Suhi's telegram was sent to Yang Chendong, he immediately ordered the light cavalry regiment of the 5-Star Army and the reconnaissance regiment, who were about to enter through the north gate, to go around the west gate and intercept hardened Barter, who might escape through this route. Not only that, Yang Chendong, who was supposed to enter the city, also led 2,000 black cavalry from the south gate to the west gate and joined in the pursuit and interception of hardened Barter's escape. Beta Persei was somewhat worried about Yang Chendong's decision. They only had 2,000 black cavalry. They didn't know how many cavalry were protecting hardened Barter. If the other party had too many people, would they be surrounded? Chapter 1305. Beta Persei couldn't help but say to Yang Chendong, "Young master, we only have 2,000 cavalry. You can't get involved so easily. Why? Don't you have confidence in the combat effectiveness of the black cavalry?" Yang Chendong looked sideways at Beta Persei. When he said this, he did not avoid it at all. Instead, his tone was a little heavier so that the black cavalry around him could hear it very clearly. At that moment, after the voice was heard, the black cavalry stared at Beta Persei with an unfriendly look. As Yang Chendong's personal guards, the black cavalry was an extremely arrogant existence. How could such an army tolerate being looked down upon and looked down upon by others? Even if the person who said this was Beta Persei, it still made them very angry. Being stared at like this made Yang Air feel like he was being cut by 1,000 blades. He bitterly smiled and said, "Young master, I don't dare to have such thoughts. I just think that for safety reasons, we can transfer some cavalry to complete this mission with us. For example, the 5th Regiment of the 1st Cavalry Division that hasn't entered the city yet. After all, one more person means one more force." With such an explanation, the murderous gazes became less fierce. Beta Persei could not help but wipe the cold sweat off his forehead. Just now, the momentum and pressure were so great that he almost couldn't bear it. Yang Chendong naturally understood Beta Persei and knew that this was also for his own safety. He thought that only transferring the 5th Regiment would not affect the overall situation and would not have any impact on cleaning up the city, so he nodded and agreed. "Well, go and arrange for Wang Shan to report. Black Cavalry, let's go. Let's go." The Black Cavalry shouted excitedly. After all, there was going to be a war soon, and those were all military merits. How could they not be excited? Just like that, when hardened Barter sent out 3 feints to help him escape, Yang Chendong also arranged for 3 cavalry regiments to pursue. As for whether they could catch up or not, that would depend on luck. In the end, it was clear that hardened Barter's luck was not good. After receiving the order, the scouting group, the light cavalry group, and the 5th World Cavalry Regiment found the 3 feint armies outside the west side of the city, a total of 6,000 cavalry. They easily killed over 1,000 people and learned that hardened Barter had escaped with 5,000 cavalry. They reported this to Yang Chendong. The Black Cavalry's equipment was too heavy. In terms of speed, they were far slower than the other 3 cavalry units. That was why Yang Chendong had received this information before he even reached the battlefield. Afterward, he asked someone to bring him a map. After observing it for a while, his eyes fell on Boston Lake. In his opinion, if he was hardened Barter, he would definitely choose to go around the lake. This was the best route. "Come on, change direction. Don't go to the west gate, go to the lake. At the same time, send out cavalry scouts to expand the search area." At this moment, hardened Barter naturally didn't know that the 3 cavalry units he sent out had been taken down. He didn't have a transcendental communication device, like a radio station, in his hands. Right now, he was still walking around in the dark. It wasn't exactly casual. They still had a goal, and that was to go around Boston Lake. It was just that this lake was not small. They had already walked for more than 3 hours, but they were only halfway there. This was also because there were too many people holding them back. For example, the concubines of the royal family. They were women and weren't good at riding horses. At this moment, they were sitting in several carriages. Because of their presence, the speed of the team naturally slowed down. In this regard, Tushi was naturally anxious in his heart, but he didn't dare to say anything disrespectful. Not only were there concubines in the carriages, but there were also 3 little princes and 2 little princesses. They were existences that he couldn't afford to offend. The team walked like this, neither fast nor slow. But it seemed that good people were blessed by the heavens. They didn't encounter any enemies along the way. Seeing that the sky was already dark, they had already completed 4/5 of their goal of going around Boston Lake. It seemed that victory was in front of them. General Tushi, it's getting late. Should we find a place to rest? After all, we have been on the road for more than half a day. Everyone is a little tired. Hardin Barter, who insisted on riding on the horse and didn't sit in the carriage, asked with a face full of sweat. After all, he was a king. Staying in the palace every day and neglecting his training, he suddenly rushed for a few hours. Now, he could only feel a tearing pain in the muscles of his legs. If it was not for the face of the king, he would have crawled into the carriage to enjoy the massage and care of the concubines. Naturally, Tushi had already seen Hardin Barter's performance on the horse. He had thought more than once about whether he should remind the king to get into the carriage to rest. However, considering that this might embarrass the king, it would not look good on his face, so he endured it. Now that he heard the king's words, he knew that the other party really couldn't endure it anymore. Considering that they didn't see the cavalry of the 5-star army chasing after them, there shouldn't be any problems. Tushi nodded and agreed. Okay, then we will stop and rest. Your Majesty, you also know that we haven't completely escaped to a safe place yet. Hardin Barter just wanted to rest. As for when they would set off, he didn't care. This was because he had already made up his mind. This time, he wouldn't come out of the carriage. He nodded and said, "Okay, I will listen to the general." Just like this, before they completely escaped from the dangerous area, the group stopped. This action also destroyed Hardin Barter's last hope and possibility of escaping. At this moment, Yang Shindong's 2,000 black cavalry were walking in a valley 30 li away. The cavalry outpost he sent was less than 10 li away from Hardin Barter. Even if that was the case, it would be extremely difficult to discover the other party in the pitch-black night. However, as the ruler of a country, Hardin Barter was not used to eating dry food and insisted on making a fire to eat hot food. As a result, the bonfire was dazzling and bright in the dark night. It was because of the fire that the outpost of the black cavalry discovered them. They quickly sent someone to report to the main force behind. There's a bonfire in a carriage? Yang Qindong's eyes lit up when he heard the news from the outpost of the black cavalry. Although it wasn't very accurate, it still made him excited. If it was just an ordinary cavalry, there shouldn't be a carriage accompanying them. Since it appeared, it was very likely that it was their target. Considering that Hardin Barter had sent a total of 3 feints and they had all fallen into his hands, the last remaining cavalry was very likely the final target. Young Master, this new discovery is very likely our target. Beta Persei's reaction wasn't slow. He thought for a while and smiled. Yes, the possibility is very high. But whether it is or not, since we have encountered them, they can't escape. Pass down the order. 500 people in a group and surround them from all sides. Yang Qindong also smiled and gave the order. At that moment, First Captain Xiao Vi was in a group, Second Captain Dao Xiao was in a group, Beta Persei was in a group, and Yang Qindong was in a group with Deputy Captain Ba Dao Jiang in a group. The 2,000 black cavalry split into 4 groups and headed straight for the lakeside, forming an encirclement that wrapped around Hardin Barter's end. The 2,000 well-trained black cavalry were not very fast. Since their target had stopped moving, they had too much time to surround him. Because they weren't fast, they didn't make the slightest sound when they moved. After a few hours, a red light appeared on the horizon. When the sky was about to brighten, they had completely surrounded Hardin Barter. When the sky was about to brighten, General Tushi walked out of the barracks in a suit of armor. Then there were continuous shouts. The 5,000 black cavalry got up one after another and began to prepare breakfast before leaving. But at this moment, a sentry on the periphery ran over in a panic and knelt in front of Tushi. General, something bad has happened. Something bad has happened. Why are you so panicked? Tushi's heart skipped a beat. For some reason, his heart began to beat faster. But in order to stabilize the morale of the army, he didn't show the slightest abnormality on his face. Although this calmness was concealed very well, it was soon completely destroyed by the sentry's next sentence. "General, we have been surrounded. There are cavalry outside, all cavalry." "What? What did you say? Where did the cavalry come from?" At this time, Tushi couldn't care less about the image of a general. He stretched out his arm and grabbed the sentry's neck. There was a trace of trembling in his voice. "General, this subordinate doesn't dare to lie to you. There are cavalry outside, and there are cavalry covered in black armor. They only reveal their eyes. They look very frightening, very frightening." The sentry's face was already pale with fright. He stammered, but in the end, he recounted the situation he knew. Covered in black armor, could it be the black cavalry? General Tushi, who was more knowledgeable than ordinary soldiers, trembled when he heard this. Then, there was an unconcealable fear in his eyes. If what the sentry said was true, it would be difficult for them to escape this time, even if they had wings. It was the black cavalry, the legendary, strongest existence of the 5-star army. Their armor was impenetrable, and their blades were invincible. Every target targeted by them would be like being targeted by a pack of wolves. In the end, they would be torn apart without leaving behind any residue. When he thought of these terrifying consequences, although the weather was still very cold at dawn, Tushi's body was already covered in layers of hot sweat. Moreover, the sweat involuntarily dripped down from his forehead. Chapter 1306. What happened in the camp also alarmed Hardenbarter, who was still resting in the carriage. He sent a guard to ask what happened. Tushi came to the carriage with a pale face and reported through the curtain. "Your Majesty, something bad has happened. We have been discovered and surrounded. It seems to be Bugnam of Gojozian's black cavalry." "What? Surrounded? Black cavalry?" Hardenbarter's voice was trembling when he said these words. Obviously, he was also frightened by this news. At this time, he began to regret. If he knew this would happen, he would have thought of a way to escape last night, no matter how tired he was. But now, it was too late to say anything. Thinking that once they were caught by the 5-star army, they would suffer a fate worse than death. Hardenbarter grabbed the Tushi general's arm as if he was grasping at a life-saving straw. "Can we break out of the encirclement?" Tushi wanted to say that it was impossible. This time, they were facing the black cavalry, the most powerful existence in the 5-star army. But after seeing Hardenbarter's hopeful eyes, he endured and didn't say the worst result. Instead, he swallowed his saliva and said, "No matter what, this minister will do his best." "Good." Hardenbarter didn't know that Tushi was being perfunctory. He said with some excitement, "Then I will leave everything to General Tushi. Don't worry, as long as this king can break out of the encirclement, I will take good care of your family." This was to let Tushi stay behind to cover the retreat. This also showed Hardenbarter's selfish side. In his eyes, his own safety was always the most important. As for others, they could be sacrificed at any time. If the king wanted the minister to die, the minister had no choice but to die. Tushi had no other choice but to nod heavily. "Your Majesty, please rest assured, this minister will do his best to delay them." The next step was simple. Tushi led 3,000 cavalry to fight against 2,000 black cavalry. Under the protection of the remaining 2,000 cavalry, Hardenbarter led a group of royal family members to break out of the encirclement, trying to kill their way out. As long as Hardenbarter didn't die, the Torpon kingdom wouldn't be considered dead. There was still hope. The Black Knight Dragon Guards that were slowly approaching from the periphery did not immediately launch an attack. It was as if they were playing a game of eagle catching chicks, constantly shrinking the encirclement. The black cavalry was fully clad in black armor. Even their war horses were covered in black armor. Only their eyes were exposed. They gave off a very eerie and terrifying feeling. The sky was already bright, and when their line of sight wasn't obstructed the appearance of the invincible Black Army was a great deterrent to the Turkopan cavalry. Before the battle even began, many of the Turkmen cavalry were already worried. Would they be a match for the Black cavalry? The Tushi general also felt a chill in his heart and did not have the slightest bit of confidence. However, this was his duty. Even if he knew that he would die, he still had to give it a try. Everyone, get ready to charge. The enemy only has 1,000 cavalry. They don't have as many people as we do. Kill. The Tushi general felt that the morale of the army had been affected. He didn't dare to wait any longer. Otherwise, who knew how many people would dare to charge? He only hoped that with the advantage of numbers, he could delay the 5-star army. In this way, he could find an opportunity for the king to break out of the encirclement. Raise your guns. Just as the 3,000 Turkmen cavalry received the order to attack the 5-star army cavalry 2 miles away, Beta Persei, Qiu Vi, Dao Xiao, and Ba Dao Jiang, the 4 captains simultaneously issued the order to counterattack. Then, in the hands of the Black cavalry, each of them took out a Black Type 95 submachine gun. With the continuous development, especially under the guidance of Yang Chendong, and after taking out a large number of related books, the ammunition lathe in the arsenal of Crimson City was finally completed. Although the output was not very high due to various reasons, it could already produce 10,000 bullets a day. And with the completion of another lathe, this number would continue to increase. Yang Shendong also didn't need to rely on the ammunition box in the warehouse like before. He also didn't need to worry about whether the manually made bullets were qualified or not. Without any worries, the Black Cavalry was the first to be issued the Type 95 submachine gun. Moreover, each soldier usually carried 5 submachine guns, which was a total of 150 bullets. In addition, their whole body was protected by iron armor. It could be said that they were invincible in both offense and defense. Only the 3,000 Turkmen cavalry were already scared out of their wits. They didn't have the slightest hint of fear. With the order to raise the guns, the muzzles immediately spat out tongues of fire towards the charging Turkmen cavalry. It was only a distance of 2 li. To the cavalry, it would only take a few seconds to cover the distance. However, these few seconds were like the difference between heaven and hell. The moment the gunshots rang out, the fate of the Turkmen cavalry was decided. Bam, bam, bam. Bam, bam, bam. After the rapid-fire switch was turned on, that didn't even need to aim. They only needed to fire continuously, and more Turkmen cavalry fell in their charge. This was simply a battle of attrition. No, it should be said that this was a massacre. Under the clash of cold weapons and high-grade firearms, the 3,000 Turkmen cavalry were like moths to a flame. They fell to the ground, charged again, and fell to the ground again. In just a few seconds, the battlefield beside Boston Lake was covered in blood. The ground was littered with the corpses of the cavalry. Among them was the Tushi general. The general, who still wanted to risk his life, was unfortunately hit by the first batch of bullets. Then, he was devoured by the endless sea of bullets. We surrender. There were still 1,000 Turkmen cavalry. When they saw so many of their comrades fall in the blink of an eye, their hearts finally collapsed. No one wanted to die, let alone die in such a meaningless charge. Immediately, those who were still alive jumped off their war horses, threw down the sabers in their hands, and knelt on the ground. It was a scene of black crows and crows. Yang Chendong, who had been watching this scene like a bystander, shook his head lightly. Everything was within his expectations. He waved his hand lightly and said to the second company leader, Dao Xiao, "I'll leave this place to you guys. The rest of you, continue the pursuit." Although they said they were going to continue the pursuit, they only ran for 5 stars and surrounded the Turfan group that was still moving slowly with more than a dozen carriages. When the gunshots rang out, the sound of firecrackers rang out continuously. Hardin Barter, who was sitting in the carriage, knew that it was over. He wasn't naive enough to think that someone would set off firecrackers here to welcome him. If that wasn't the case, then there was only one possibility. The sound just now wasn't firecrackers, but the sound of gunfire. He had long heard that the five-star army possessed the most powerful firearms. He had also seen the power of the cannons. However, he did not expect that even the firearms were so powerful. Now that he was surrounded again, hardened Barter, who had nowhere to go, finally walked out of the largest carriage. What he saw was a group of five-star army cavalry in black clothes and black armor. On his side, most of the 2,000 cavalrymen who were protecting them had already dismounted. They threw down their weapons and obediently squatted on the ground. Only less than 200 cavalrymen and 5 palace guards were still standing with swords in their hands. They were dutiful and loyal, but looking at their trembling bodies and arms, it could be seen that they were quite afraid at this moment. 3,000 cavalrymen. They couldn't even hold on for a minute. If they didn't die, they would surrender. How long could they hold on for? The scene in front of him made hardened Barter, who wanted to be tough, lose his confidence. When he saw Yang Chendong in the black cavalry, who was the only one wearing a golden battle robe, hardened Barter suddenly knelt on the ground. Great Bugnam of Gojoseon, I surrender. In the end, hardened Barter chose to surrender. Surrounded on all sides, he had no other choice. The battlefield suddenly became very quiet. Except for the sound of the wind from Boston Lake, no other sounds could be heard. Everyone's eyes fell on Yang Chendong, who was wearing a golden battle robe, waiting for the king's decision. Yang Chendong didn't disappoint everyone. He quickly said, "Surrender? You don't deserve it." These words were like a heavy hammer that smashed into hardened Barter's heart. At this moment, his face was pale and his eyes were filled with endless fear. Why? Didn't you say that as long as I surrender, I will live? Why? Yang Chendong coldly snorted and said with a cold expression, "Everyone only has one chance. Your father chose to surrender, but because you gave up this chance, hundreds of my generals died because of your fake surrender. Just based on this, you will definitely die. Where's Ba Daojiang?" Subordinate is here. Ba Daojiang, who had been waiting for a long time, shouted and rode out. It was Ba Daojiang who had negotiated with King Shiza. Because of this, hundreds of Mongol soldiers were killed by arrows. Although Yang Chendong didn't mean to blame him for this matter, it had always been a knot in his heart. Now that he finally had a chance to take revenge, how could he let it go? He immediately stared at hardened Barter, who was trembling like a sieve. He thought that as the king of a country, as long as he was willing to surrender, no one would refuse. However, Yang Chendong didn't feel at ease at all. At this moment, hardened Barter, who was shrouded in death, felt his body turn cold. His face was pale as he stammered, "No, you can't kill me. I am the king of Turpan. If you kill me, you will attract the curses and fear of others. This won't be good for your future unification. I have already surrendered. You can't kill me." Chapter 1307. Nope, benefits? This is not something you should worry about. After a cold snort, Yang Chendong said without changing his expression, since he wanted to lead all the Han people to the peak of the world, he was destined to walk on a pile of bones. If he was afraid of rumors, then he might as well not do anything. But since he was going to do it, he had to do it to the best of his ability. He had to make all the enemies feel fear from the bottom of their hearts the moment they heard his name. Only by doing so could he achieve the best results with the least number of casualties. "Ba Daojiang, what are you waiting for?" "Yes." With a loud shout, a fast horse suddenly rushed out of the army and rushed straight towards hardened Barter, who was standing beside the carriage with a pale face. "Protect His Majesty." The 200 most loyal guards shouted and wanted to stop Ba Daojiang, but before they could do anything, another burst of gunfire sounded. The 200 cavalrymen didn't even have time to rush out before they fell off their horses one by one. It was also at this time that Ba Daojiang rushed past them. His sharp saber fell down, and a big head flew up. Hardened Barter's eyes were wide open as his head was separated from his body. Even when he died, he didn't think that the five-star army would really take his life. He was the ruler of a country. As soon as hardened Barter died, the remaining 1,000 or so cavalrymen trembled all over. They didn't know what would happen to them. Beta Persei rode to Yang Qindong's side and asked carefully, "Young master, I'll leave the rest to you," Yang Qindong said with waning interest. Hardenbarter was already dead, so he naturally didn't care about the others. After saying this, under the lead of the 200 Black Knight Dragon Guards, he slowly returned to where he came from. Yes, Beta Persei respectfully sent off Yang Qindong. When his arm fell, he looked back at the Turpan soldiers kneeling on the ground. They were so scared that they didn't know what to do. He slowly said, "If you want to live, kill all the people in the carriage. Otherwise, die." As for the other Black Knights and Dragon Guards, after they are done with the development, they will set up an observatory. We must let others know the consequences of going against our 5-star army. This meant that they couldn't let Hardenbarter's family go. Although they were mostly women and children, they were also a scourge. If they stayed, who knows what would happen when the 3 princes grow up. If they didn't remove the roots, they would grow again when the spring breeze. Although this was a bit cruel, for the sake of the overall situation, they had to do it. Of course, the Black Knight Dragon Guards were not interested in doing such dirty work. They did not want to attack unarmed people. Fortunately, with these surrendered soldiers, they could do such a thing. They could also use them as proof of their allegiance to seize the right to live. Hardenbarter was dead, so his family naturally didn't pose any threat. In order to survive, the more than 1,000 cavalrymen pounced on the carriages like a pack of wolves. Then, another massacre took place. Yang Qindong, who had already gone far away, had a cold expression on his face. He didn't know if what he was doing was right or wrong. Sometimes, he would be soft-hearted. But when he thought about how, if it wasn't for his appearance, the Han people would first be enslaved by the Jianghu, slaves hundreds of years later, and become low-class people like slaves, then they would have to face the invasion of the Western powers, especially the invasion of the Japanese, who knew how many innocent people were killed. In contrast, in order to prevent the Han people from being enslaved and bullied, he was willing to be a villain and a demon king. Forget it. If I don't go to hell, who will? If there is karma, then come at me. Yang Qindong muttered in his heart as he rode away. Next to Boston Lake, statues were soon erected. Not only were there heads of women and children, but even the head of King Hardenbarter was among them. When the news spread out, it immediately caused an uproar. Countless people were furious and scolded the 5-star army for being too cruel. At the same time, they were also worried about their future. If they didn't surrender, would they have the same ending? After setting up the statues, Beta Persei said to the surviving Turpan cavalrymen, "This is what you did. It has nothing to do with our 5-star army. Do you understand? Yes, we killed these people." The captives who survived with great difficulty immediately knelt on the ground and swore. They had already taken that step and had no other choice. Very good. Beta Persei nodded in satisfaction. Although it was more or less a lie, these people really weren't killed by them. This was the truth. Hardenbarter was dead. With the help of Daiqin and Thor Jin, the city was quickly breached by the 5-star army, and public security began to stabilize. The granaries were opened, and the people could go home. For a time, the people on the streets were grateful to the 5-star army and Bugnam of Gojoseon. To the commoners, whoever allowed them to survive was their benefactor. As for the people who were loyal to the king in the face of life and death, how many of them could be Wen Tianxiang? The news that Hardenbarter died next to Boston Lake was quickly spread. This was naturally Yang Qindong's idea. He didn't need to hide anything, and since he did it, he wasn't afraid of others talking about it. At the same time, he also wanted to see how Daiqin and Jinzhou would perform. When the news came, the 2 generals immediately closed their houses and didn't come out. It didn't take long for the 2 resignations to be sent to the military camp of the 5-star army and placed in front of Yang Qindong. "Young master, you don't know what's good for you." Beta Persei's eyes flashed with anger when he saw that Daiqin and Jinzhou chose to resign from their current positions and would rather be a normal person than work for the 5-star army in Yangxia. In Beta Persei's eyes, it was their fortune that the young master was willing to use them. Now that he publicly refused, he didn't want face. It had to be said that at this moment, in Beta Persei's eyes, Yang Qindong's wishes were the most important. This was because he went from not being able to eat or sleep well to where he was today. And all of this was brought to him by Yang Qindong. He was his benefactor in this life. In comparison, Yang Qindong wasn't angry. Instead, he looked at the two resignations with satisfaction and said, "Not bad. These two are loyal and can be used. How about this? Order all the 5-star army soldiers in the city to retreat to the outer city." Outside Daiqin's house, Yang Qindong had already changed into a green robe. Beside him was the black cavalry. They didn't wear armor, but only ordinary people's clothes. They just stood there like this, waiting for the master of the house to appear. Not long later, the house door opened. Daiqin, with bloodshot eyes, brought a group of servants out and knelt in front of Yang Qindong. It could be seen that Daiqin's expression wasn't good. He knew that the king was dead, and even his family wasn't released. In his eyes, the 5-star army's actions were too cruel. He really couldn't imagine that this was done by the Han people who were taught by Confucianism. What was the difference between this and the Mongolian great Khan Kublai? With such a knot in his heart, Daiqin obviously couldn't risk his life. He was already prepared to hand over all his power and become an ordinary person. But he didn't expect that Bugnam of Gojoseon didn't have the intention to let him go. He actually brought people to his house. Was he going to hide his bow after the birds had flown away? With such doubts, and with the determination to die, Daiqin led a group of people in the mansion to kneel in front of Yang Qindong, putting on a look of absolute determination. Take the people away. With regard to Daiqin's actions, Yang Qindong didn't care at all. His face didn't show any expression, and after saying this sentence, he turned around and left. Very quickly, 2 black cavalry walked up and carried Daiqin, letting him follow in the group. As for his family members who were kneeling on the street, no one cared about them. Daiqin didn't know what they were going to do. He used his expression to suppress the cries and screams of his family members. And just like that, he followed behind Yang Qindong into Forester City. Not long later, he saw Gegener also being brought over. He was also alone and was sent into the group. The two of them walked together and quickly exchanged glances. After seeing the confusion in each other's eyes, they simply let go of the doubts in their hearts and followed behind Yang Qindong. They wanted to see what kind of tricks Bugnam of Gojoseon was going to play. The outer city was already occupied by the 5-star army, but the soldiers in the inner city had already retreated. The security of the inner city also fell into chaos because of this. Although they didn't know why the 5-star army retreated, but to many people, there was no order and law in the inner city, and this gave some people an opportunity. This was especially true for those who were lazy and gluttonous. They saw an opportunity and hope. A city without order and law, a city without supervision, caused the evilest nature in people's hearts to be exposed. When Yang Qindong and his group entered the inner city, they could see smashing and looting happening everywhere. On the streets, it was common to see people fighting to death and being crippled. A person from a rich family or a merchant became the main target of looting. Some young girls also became the existence of delicious cakes, attracting countless people's attention and looting. After just walking through one street, they saw over a dozen commoners lying on the ground in pools of blood. They saw 2 shops being smashed and burnt. They saw 3 women being openly carried on the shoulders of evil men as they left while laughing loudly. If it wasn't for the fact that Yang Qindong and his group had too many people and that they were all valiant, their embroidered clothes would have become the target of looting. Chapter 1308. How did this happen? In the group, Daiqin and Jingel's expressions changed greatly. They couldn't believe this scene. When they saw more and more Turpan civilians dying on the streets, their hearts ached and they couldn't believe it. Yang Qindong, who had been waiting for the reaction of the two, finally spoke at this time. Look, this is the true evil in the hearts of humans. This king knows that Harden Barter's death, including his entire family, was in the hands of the surrendered soldiers. You are angry, even angry. But this king wants to say that they are humans. Are these ordinary citizens not humans? If the two of you are only angry because of the destruction of the Turpan royal family, then this king can let the people kill each other and reveal their ugliest side. This way, it won't be long before this Kali city becomes an empty city. Is this what you, who claim to be good officials for the people, want to see? This question made Daichin and Jinjel speechless. They finally understood what Yang Chendong meant. If they didn't submit, then he would let this matter continue to develop. At that time, all the civilians of Turpan would be destroyed because of the internal strife. As Turpan people, as people who had lived here for generations, both Daichin and Jinjel didn't want to see such a thing happen. That way, they wouldn't be able to face their ancestors and ancestors after death. But if they submitted to Yang Chendong and worked for him because of this, they were somewhat unwilling. For a long time, the two didn't speak. Yang Chendong also didn't have the intention to rush them. There were some things that had to be thought through by others. If he blindly interfered, even if he could be used, it might not be sincere. Since they needed time to think it through, he would give them time. After an unknown period of time, Daichin saw another family being robbed by bandits on the street. An old man was stabbed and fell on the street because he chased after the bandits. Daichin finally couldn't bear it anymore. Wunan King, we have already surrendered. They are already your people. How can you watch them die and not save them? Daichin was angry. This was what Yang Chendong wanted to see. He laughed and said, "Surrendered? Why do I see them returning to their own residences and not caring about the outside world?" He was saying that Daichin and Jinjel's actions made him angry. At that moment, Daichin could only speak in a short breath. But we also did our best with the 5-star army to enter Kylasi. No one will deny your contributions and efforts. But what this prince wants is for you to truly submit to me. Yang Chendong's voice suddenly became stern. These civilians weren't true Han people. If someone started it, they would pick up their weapons and become enemies with the 5-star army. Even so, if one more died, he wouldn't feel the slightest bit of heartache. Only those who truly submitted to Yang Xie were his people. Only then would they receive his care and care. Only then would he have the obligation to protect their rights. Yang Chendong wasn't in a hurry, but Daichin and Jinjel couldn't do that. If they just stayed in their residences and didn't care about the outside world, maybe they could pretend to be deaf and blind. But since they saw it with their own eyes, they couldn't just ignore it. Bugnamago Josian, we submit. We take back our resignation. We are willing to work for Yang Xie and the 5-star army. Finally, the cruelty of reality forced the two to change their minds. They had to do their best to protect the civilians of Turfan. Yang Chendong was waiting for these words. He stopped in his tracks and turned around to look at Daichin and Jinjel. Very good, you made the right choice. Now, I will give you the authority to send soldiers into the city. When the time comes, I will leave behind 10,000 5-star army to help you restore law and order. After that, there will be other non-human civilians coming in. The Turfan civilians here will also leave their homeland and live in other places. But I can guarantee that as long as they sincerely submit, not only will their safety be guaranteed, their future lives will be better than now. Even the descendants of the two generals will thank you for your actions today. Yang Chendong had never been stingy with his help to the civilians who truly submitted to him. When they went to a new place, they would be given enough land to live on and start a new life. At that time, there would be no more war, no more fear. There would only be hope and longing for a limitless life. This point was already felt by the countless people who submitted to Yang Xie. After finally convincing Daichin and Gejener, Yang Chendong handed over the task of reorganizing the Turpan kingdom to the two of them. Based on the principle of using the barbarians to control the barbarians, no one understood the situation here better than them. Naturally, no one could do a better job than them. Although Turfan was destroyed, Yang Chendong's footsteps would not stop. He brought the 5-star army and continued to move deeper into Ili. His target was the entire world. Just like Yang Xie had the Security Bureau and the Central Intelligence Bureau, Baiming also had the Imperial Secret Service and the East Faction Guards. While Yang Chendong was leading the 5-star army to slaughter in all directions in Ili, shaking the prestige of our Han people. Information regarding that place was also being sent back to the hands of Marquis, Wuching Shi Heng. Every time he saw the news of the five-star army winning another battle, Shi Heng's face would turn ugly. If not for the fact that he understood Yang Chendong, he would have doubted the authenticity of the news. The Great Ming Dynasty emphasized culture and suppressed martial arts. The status of martial artists was never high. Actually, it was not only the Great Ming Dynasty that was like this. Ever since Lushan started a rebellion, the Song Dynasty was like this, and now, the Ming Dynasty was like this as well. Even though the Zhao clan and the Zhu clan started a rebellion through martial arts, this did not stop them from getting rid of the donkey after it had outlived its usefulness. That's right, they got rid of the donkey after it had outlived its usefulness. In order to prevent the same thing from happening to them, the Great Ming Dynasty had many similarities with the Song Dynasty. For example, in order to prevent the martial artists from gaining power, the emperor would work together with the civil officials to suppress them. This resulted in the saying that the emperor and the scholar officials ruled the world together. As a result, the strength of the country would slowly decline, and in the end, it would be replaced by other dynasties. All of this was just to say one thing. Under such a policy, it was difficult for the martial artists to achieve anything. Shi Heng lived in this era and had seen too many cases of civil officials suppressing the martial artists. Even though he was Wuching Hao, it was still difficult for him to enter the eyes of many people. In their eyes, he was just a martial artist. There were many things that happened from time to time. For example, the provision of provisions was always a little late. It seemed that if they did not do so, it would be difficult to show the importance of the civil officials. At the Wan Quan division, the ration officer once again came to Shi Heng to complain about the lack of rations. When he sent people to rush them, they were deliberately making things difficult for them. There were even rumors that they had eaten so much, yet they still hadn't won a single battle, and that they were truly a bunch of trash. Enough! Shi Heng sat in the main hall of the residence with an unhappy expression. Marquis will personally report this matter. The provisions will be sent soon. His eyes weren't very big, but they were somewhat sinister as he fiercely glared at the fodder manager. Then, he waved his hand, indicating for him to leave. The warning in that glance was very obvious. It was probably to tell the provision officer that some words could not be said casually. If he dared to disturb the morale of his troops, he would be punished by military law. After receiving the warning, the fodder officer immediately retreated while trembling. Just as he left, an order was sent out to invite General Fong Dingshan to the residence for a discussion. Not long after, General Fong Dingshan, who was dressed in armor and somewhat travel-worn, arrived at the Wuching Hao residence. In the study, he saw Shi Heng waiting for him. "Marquis, you called for me?" When Fong Dingshan saw Shi Heng, he greeted him. Then he found a place to sit and drank the cup of warm tea in front of him. One was a close official of the emperor, while the other was a marquis personally conferred by the emperor. The two of them worked together in the frontier fortress. As time passed, their relationship became much closer. Just from Fong Dingshan's behavior after entering the study, it could be seen. Shi Heng looked at Fong Dingshan with a face full of smiles. He also looked at his casual actions. This person had some ability, especially in the area of training soldiers. Under his leadership, the Liaodong Iron Cavalry's battle strength was constantly increasing. The number of soldiers also increased. It had increased from the previous 70,000 to the current 100,000. Naturally, this was tacitly approved by the emperor. At the same time, it was also fully supported by Shi Heng. After seeing the five-star army's cavalry continue to dominate the world, the importance of cavalry became more and more obvious. Not only did the Liaodong Iron Cavalry increase in numbers, their battle strength was also not bad. Shi Heng went to check on them before. Whether it was their military strength, military discipline, or battle strength, they all shocked him. He had seen with his own eyes a group of 200 Liaodong Iron Cavalry charge into a group of 3,000 infantrymen. When the wooden swords clashed, the wind swept away the clouds and defeated the enemy. With such a strong army, Even if they were to face the famous cavalry of the five-star army, they wouldn't be afraid. With his confidence, Shi Hung had called the other party over in the hopes of winning a battle. This way, he wouldn't be underestimated by the civil officials in charge of the provisions behind him. After watching Fong Dingshan drink 2 full bowls of tea, Shi Hung finally opened his mouth. He first repeated what the provisions officer said, then sat down to see Fong Dingshan's reaction. Oh, someone actually said that. They really can open their mouths. The emperor didn't even order us to fight against a five-star army. They're jumping up and down like monkeys. Fong Dingshan was after all a martial artist, so when he spoke, he did not have too many taboos. Chapter 1309. That's right. Shi Hung said empathetically. Those people in Jingdo are already afraid of the powerful Yang Chendong. Especially after the previous defeat, some people are as timid as mice. They keep telling His Majesty not to provoke Bugnam of Gojoseon. They even say that until now, Bugnam of Gojoseon hasn't done anything harmful to the Great Ming. It's really funny when you think about it. They don't make a move because they have too many targets to conquer. They don't have the time to do anything. That's right. Those scholars who only know how to use literature and martial arts are simply harming the country, Fong Dingshan said in agreement. He also didn't agree with these people's words. What Bugnam of Gojoseon still had the Great Ming in his heart and didn't dare to make a move against the Great Ming. In his eyes, it was nonsense. Yang Chendong didn't make a move now because he didn't think the time was right. Once he did make a move, it would be like the autumn wind sweeping away the fallen leaves. No one would be able to stop him, right? Scholars are harming the country. Shi Hung also let out a long sigh. After seeing Fong Dingshan's anger, he suddenly changed the topic and said, "It's because of this that we can't let this kind of thing happen. We can't just stand by and watch the five-star army grow. I don't dare to say anything about other places, but at the very least, we can't allow this kind of thing to happen in our territory." Oh, Marquis is preparing to make a move? Fong Dingshan also understood the meaning behind these words and asked with some excitement. Yes, he's going to make a move. We can't just stand by and watch the five-star army's provisions walk past Tulu City every day and do nothing, Shi Hung said with a righteous expression. Fong Dingshan first nodded in agreement, but then quickly shook his head. But His Majesty didn't give an order. This order was referring to the order to openly attack the five-star army. Speaking of which, ever since they failed to attack the beginning city, Baiming had become much more well-behaved. At the very least, they no longer openly became enemies with the five-star army. In the words of those civil officials, since Bugnam of Gojoseon was so belligerent, then let him fight others. As long as he did not find trouble with Baiming, they would let him do as he pleased. Swords had no eyes on the battlefield. Once they lost a battle and Yang Chendong died on the battlefield, the so-called five-star army would also collapse. At that time, Baiming would send out troops to suppress them, and they would be able to win the battle. In the end, this was the mentality of an ostrich. Since he couldn't beat them, he placed his hopes on others. Since the five-star army did not take the initiative to provoke the Baiming army, they did not need to make a move. Everyone could live peacefully for a few days. Naturally, Su Yozhin's contribution was not lacking in this. Yang Chendong needed to conquer the grasslands and the inner regions to increase the five-star army's influence and territory. If Baiming made a ruckus at this time, it would be very inconvenient. This was why Su Yozhin ordered the Baiming army to not make a move. Now, it seemed that the effect was not bad. At least some civil officials believed it. Baiming's emperor, Zhu Qiyu, also did the same. However, Shi Hung, who had been laughed at for asking for provisions, felt a bit of anger in his heart. He decided to make a move and fight with the five-star army to find trouble with them. It's fine. It's true that the emperor didn't give any orders, so we don't need to use our own names. We can just pretend to be bandits and remnants of the grasslands. Marquis has already thought about it. We can split up into smaller groups and use small groups to disturb the enemy supply lines. This way, we won't have to worry about being reprimanded. We can also train our soldiers and steal some provisions for our own use. It's killing 3 birds with 1 stone. The more sure Hung spoke, the more excited he became. It was as if countless benefits were already waiting for him. At this moment, Fang Bingshan's eyes became brighter and brighter. Disguising themselves as bandits and forces opposing the 5-star army to disturb them was indeed a good move. This way, they wouldn't have to worry about the emperor's reprimand. If they fought more battles, they would be able to accumulate small victories. It was truly wonderful. He was so excited that he immediately stood up and said, "That's great. I'll go arrange it right away." "Good. General Fang, you've worked hard. However, you must remember not to send too many people at once. After all, there aren't many forces opposing the 5-star army in this area." Shi Hung carefully warned. He said this because he had another purpose. That was to send out a small number of cavalry at once. Even if one of the groups failed or were completely wiped out, it wouldn't affect the overall situation of the Liaodong cavalry. Fang Bingshan listened and nodded repeatedly. Then, the two discussed for a long time and discussed some specific issues. In the end, when both sides felt that there were no problems, they looked at each other and laughed. Under the protection of more than 100 5-star army soldiers, a group of more than 10 horse carriages escorted the provisions from the first city to the Shajing city. Along with this group, there were also 200 people of different races. There were men and women, old and young. They either brought their families or supported the carriages as they walked. Upon closer inspection, everyone's eyes were filled with yearning for a better future. These 200 people had already obtained identification cards issued by the Logistics Command. With this, they could each receive 10 mu of rations and farming tools according to the number of people they had when they arrived at the new place. They could also be allocated a house and a sum of money that was enough for them to settle down in their new home. The future place would also be their new starting point. As long as they were willing to work hard, with provisions and money, how could their life not be good? Although they had to leave their hometown because of this, compared to living a stable and prosperous life, those were nothing. The 200 people were even chatting and laughing along the way. Although everyone came from different ethnic groups and regions, it was very likely that they would be living together in the future. Thus, they slowly became familiar with each other along the way. For the behavior of the people, the 100 5-star army soldiers didn't do anything to stop them. The higher-ups had already said that as long as the people were obedient, they would be convenient along the way. After all, the army would still need to rely on these people to provide the provisions needed by the army in the future. It was a bit inappropriate to say that they were the parents of food and clothing, but it was not too much to say that they depended on each other. In this way, the people helped to drive the carriages. When the road was smooth, they would sit in the carriages to rest for a while. From time to time, when they encountered water sources, the soldiers and civilians would stop to fetch water and interact with each other. It was a picture of harmony. However, all of this beauty was suddenly cut short by a series of rumbling sounds that came from the ground. As the captain of the team, Bien Bin, the company commander, pulled out his sword when he heard the rumbling sound. Then he shouted, "Soldiers, prepare for war. People hide beside the carriages." It was no wonder that Bien Bin was so nervous. The area he was walking in was far from the first city and Shajing city, so there would often be bandits in this area. Although relying on the powerful reputation of the 5-star army, ordinary people didn't dare to find trouble with them casually. However, there were still some desperados among them, and there were still some people who were willing to take the risk. With the idea that a villain would not make a big mistake, Bien Bin gathered the soldiers together. Among them, there were 50 soldiers who had war horses. At this time, they were sharpening their swords with the company commander, ready to deal with any unexpected situation. On the other hand, the people didn't seem to be nervous. They were all people who had been conquered by the 5-star army. They had seen the power of the 5-star army and didn't think that anyone would dare to challenge the authority of the 5-star army. Therefore, even if they heard the rumbling sound of the war horses, there were still some people who looked forward, wanted to see who was so bold, and then watched these people who appeared leave with their tails between their legs. The five-star flag was fluttering in the breeze, like a command flag standing on the mule carriage. It also proved the identity of this supply team to the outside world. Many times, the appearance of the five-star flag was like a huge and unstoppable city wall, causing some bandits to forget and retreat. After all, the strength of the five-star army was too strong. It was so strong that many small tribes who had not yet surrendered did not have any intention to resist. This was also the biggest reliance and confidence in the eyes of the people. Report: a group of 200 Mongolian bandits appear in front of us. They are rushing towards us quickly. They are less than 5 miles away. The scout cavalry in charge of guarding the front rushed back and shouted loudly as he rushed back. Mongolian bandits? When he heard this name, Bien Bin's face became a little ugly. The so-called Mongolian bandits referred to those small Mongolian groups who were not willing to surrender. They were usually small in number, and their battle strength was not strong. When faced with the five-star army, they would avoid them. However, when faced with the five-star army, they would suddenly attack like a mad dog. These bandits could not be killed, and they could not be killed. They were the most troublesome thing to deal with. Who would have thought that he would encounter them here today? Bien Bin felt a headache coming on, and he hurriedly started to get into formation. 50 cavalry soldiers were ready to fight at any time, and 50 infantry soldiers were ready to shoot from afar. Bien Bin wanted to use this method to warn those bandits that he was not someone to be trifled with. He hoped that this method could scare them away and make them stay away from him and avoid a possible disaster. Bien Bin was a little nervous, but he did not show it on his face. Instead, he confidently said to his soldiers and the people around the carriage, "Everyone, don't worry. Even if the bandits come, they will not easily make a move. For these carriages of provisions, the price they have to pay is not proportional to the price they will get." Everyone thought that the bandits who came were after the provisions. However, they did not know that this time it was not the bandits who came, but the valiant Liaodong Iron Cavalry. Bombing had spent a lot of money to build this cavalry. Chapter 13:10. It was only the distance of a five-star army. For a real cavalry, it would only take half the time it takes to drink a cup of tea to arrive. When both sides could clearly see each other's formation, Bien Bin, as the company commander, took the initiative to move forward and shouted, "We're the new five-star army's new army, 1012th Division, 101st Division, 7th Regiment, 2nd Battalion, 5th Company. We were ordered to escort the supplies to the army in front. It's better for you to move aside. Otherwise, if you attract the wrath of the five-star army, it's not something you can." After revealing his identity, before he could finish his warning, an arrow pierced through the air and hit Bien Bin's chest, where his heart was located. With just one arrow, Bien Bin's shouting stopped abruptly. His body trembled a little, and with an unwilling expression, he fell from his horse. Bien Bin was dead. The sudden death of a company commander shocked everyone. The 200 civilians let out a cry of alarm and started to flee in all directions. Obviously, this scene had exceeded their psychological defenses. They did not expect the bandits to be so arrogant to actually kill someone without saying a word. Furthermore, the person they killed was a captain of the five-star army. This was equivalent to drawing a grudge that would not end until one of them was dead. Presumably, once this matter was spread, the headquarters of the five-star army would definitely not let this matter rest. However, that was all for later. The most important thing now was to survive. Otherwise, they would definitely not be able to witness this scene. The civilians began to run in all directions in panic. However, the soldiers could not run away. They still needed to avenge their company commander. After hesitating for a moment, both the cavalry and the infantry launched their own counterattack. Thus, a small-scale battle began. Unfortunately, the cavalry needed some distance to launch an attack, while the infantry's range was not enough. In just the first clash, the five-star army suffered a great loss. More than 30 soldiers died on the spot. The 200 cavalry of the bandits did not feel satisfied after the first charge. What they wanted was to kill all of them and not leave a single one alive. Therefore, They quickly mobilized the horses to charge again. After repeating this process 4 times, there was not a single 5-star army soldier who could breathe beside the carriage. All of their brothers in the company had been killed. Under the surprise attack, only 2 of the Meng bandits, 200 cavalrymen, were killed, and only a dozen were injured. Seeing this result, the leading Liaodong cavalry general was very satisfied. He laughed and said, "1 team, stay behind to escort the carriages. 2, chase after the fleeing civilians. Remember, don't leave a single one alive. Don't leave a single one alive." The cavalry of the second group, which had close to 100 men, responded in unison before charging off in all directions. Not long after, cries for help could be heard from afar, but they soon disappeared from the grassland. 100 soldiers and 200 civilians were all dead. Not a single person was left alive. And this was just the beginning. In just 4 days, more than 10 companies and more than 2,000 civilians have been killed, and more than 200 carriages of provisions have been stolen. The news was quickly discovered by the scouts of the 5-star army, and they reported back one by one. In the headquarters of the new army, Tiger's man's eyes were burning with anger. Looking at the bad news that came one after another, his face was as gloomy as water. In front of him, the 3 company commanders were also unhappy. They clenched their fists and looked like they wanted to eat someone. Forcefully suppressing the anger in his heart, Tiger's man looked at the 3 commanders and asked, "Tell me what you think." The commander of the 101st Army, Lujua, who had the most experience, was the first to speak. "This is clearly a military operation against our 5-star army. Someone is playing with fire. We can't just sit here and wait for death. We must find the culprit and kill one as a warning to the others. Let's establish Jingguan Temple to scare everyone." His voice was filled with murderous intent. Lujua was really angry. More than half of the soldiers that were killed were from the 101st Army. As a commander, how could he not be angry when he saw his soldiers die without knowing who the culprit was? That's right. We must investigate. After we find the culprit, we must exterminate his entire family as a warning to the others. The commander of the 102nd Army, Hichong, also spoke. His aura was not any weaker than Lujua's. On the other hand, the commander of the 103rd Army, Qin Feng, didn't speak immediately. Instead, he lowered his head and thought about something. His silence made Tiger's man look at him. "Commander Qin, what do you think?" Qin Feng only woke up when his name was called. He raised his head and said his opinion. "Commander Tiger, from what I see, this isn't the work of normal bandits. I've asked the scouts who went to investigate the scene. They said that most of our soldiers were killed in one hit. I really can't think of anyone who could do this. As expected of someone who worked in the Ministry of Public Security in Crimson City. He could see the essence of the matter at a glance." Tiger's man nodded in satisfaction. "That's right. What Commander Qin said is right. If it were normal bandits, it would be impossible to kill all of them. Even if our 5-star army can't defeat them, at least 10 to 20% of our soldiers should be able to escape. However, none of them escaped. This is enough to prove that our opponent is a powerful and well-organized organization. Normal bandits can't be compared to them." The moment Tiger's man finished speaking, the commander of the 101st Army, Lujua, blurted out, "Does this mean that the Walla army has returned?" The news of Yesen leading 70,000 Walla army and escaping from the inner district had already been spread back. Yang Shandong had even sent a telegram to remind everyone to be careful of the enemy's sudden attack. After all, he couldn't be sure if Yesen was really afraid of him or not. Luju's analysis was reasonable. "It can't be them." Commander Qin Feng directly denied it. "Why?" Lujua asked in confusion. "It's very simple. This isn't the style of the Walla cavalry. If they appeared here, 70,000 of them would have already caused a commotion. Only then would they be able to attract more Walla cavalry to join them. Why would they do something so cowardly? Just for a small amount of food, the sacrifice is not proportional to the gain." Qin Feng said in a very confident tone. Less than 200 carriages of food was really not much use to a 70,000 Walla cavalry. He even had a feeling that the real target of the attacker wasn't the food. It was just something they did along the way. Qin Feng's words made Lu Zhuo fall into deep thought. He didn't say anything else. On the other hand, the commander of the 102nd Army, He Chong, suddenly thought of something and said, "If it's not the Wara cavalry, could it be the Baiming army?" It wasn't strange for He Chong to say this. In his opinion, the only powerful army in the area was the Baiming army. But did they have the guts to do so? Qin Feng didn't say anything. Although he thought so, he didn't have any evidence. But when it came to military matters like this, if it wasn't handled well, it could lead to big problems. Think about it. If it wasn't the Baiming army who did it, and they really did fight the Baiming army, what would the result be? The person who actually did it would probably wake up laughing in his sleep. Investigate. In the end, it was Tiger's man who made the decision. Send more cavalry scouts. If one team isn't enough, then send two. If two teams aren't enough, then send 5 or 10 teams. In short, we have to find them and surround them. We need solid evidence. After the meeting ended, all the cavalry scouts in the new army were sent out. Not only that, Yang Si from the logistics headquarters had also called over the cavalry scout division that was currently in training. This was a cavalry scout division that he was currently training, and the first commander of the scout division was the chief scout instructor Su Yunsheng, whom he had spent a great deal of effort to invite from Crimson City. Su Yunsheng was the first recon company commander and recon battalion commander of the 5-star army. He was also a person who was registered with Yang Qindong. Later on, because of his outstanding strength, he was sent to Resin City to teach the Cold Front soldiers. Over the years, he had taught so many students that even he couldn't remember how many there were. However, he liked the feeling of fighting and killing. This time, Yang Si had spent a lot of effort to invite Yang Si, who had stayed in Resin City, to the logistics headquarters. According to his promise, as long as Su Yunsheng performed well, he would definitely have the opportunity to kill enemies on the battlefield. This time, more than 10 companies of soldiers were killed, 2,000 to 3,000 civilians were slaughtered, and 100 to 200 logistics carriages were stolen. This attracted the anger of the new regiment and also angered Yang Si. After all, the logistics and rations were under his control. Since someone dared to do this, it meant that they didn't put him in their eyes. Therefore, this time, he invited Su Yunsheng to come out. There was no need to investigate this matter clearly and obtain evidence. Since there was a battle to fight, Su Yunsheng did not decline at all. He quickly gathered the only 2,000 scouts in his hands. Although it was a division-level unit, scouts were not easy to find. Not all soldiers who could kill enemies could be good scouts. In accordance with the principle of better to have nothing than to have something substandard, only these 2,000 people were selected from the hundreds of soldiers in the logistics headquarters. However, these 2,000 people were indeed outstanding people. It was not an exaggeration to say that after a little training, they were not inferior to the soldiers of the 1st Cavalry Division. In fact, they were even better in some aspects. In the end, Su Yunsheng trained these 2,000 people as scout instructors. He was counting on these people to be successful in the future and train and bring out more outstanding scouts. Now that he had an order, Su Yunsheng gathered all these 2,000 people and gathered them on the field of the scouts outside the first city. Su Yunsheng, who had the rank of colonel, was riding on a horse majestically. His eyes inspected the 2,000 soldiers who were standing in a mighty posture. Warriors, we have a mission now. This is also a test of what you've learned recently. People always say that you're a mule or a horse. Now is the time for you to perform. Now, I order you to form a team of 10. Choose a captain and vice captain. Then, the captain will come to me to receive the mission. Now, you're dismissed. Chapter 13:11. With 2,000 soldiers and a team of 10, there were a total of 200 teams. With such a large net, Su Yunsheng had installed 200 large cameras and 2,000 small cameras between First City and Shajing City. When the time came, even the slightest movement here would not be able to escape his eyes. He wanted to see who was so bold as to launch a sneak attack on the soldiers of the 5-star army. According to the content taught before, when the 2,000 scouts left First City, it was like a spring breeze and a drizzle. Half of the scouts did not even ride a war horse. They disguised themselves as ordinary people and mixed into the crowd exiting the city. Then, they disappeared into the vast grassland and did not attract anyone's attention. Even the commander of the new army, Tiger Man, only knew that Yangtze had also sent out scouts. As for how many scouts had been sent out, he had no idea at all. Even the current highest-ranking general in First City did not know the situation, let alone the intelligence personnel of the Biming army in First City. They only knew that the new army had sent out all the scouts. They also knew that these scouts were wearing military uniforms and were looking for something in groups. Later, this news was passed to Marquis Wu Qingho, Shi Hung, by means of a messenger pigeon. Soon, the news was passed to General Fong Dingshan, who was waiting for an opportunity to continue to attack the logistics and transport troops of the 5-star army. Fong Dingshan had long expected that the new army would respond. He had also specially formulated a plan for this. He quickly ordered the Liaodong cavalry, who were looking for opportunities everywhere, to stop all military operations and avoid the limelight first. As a result, thousands of scouts of the new army returned without any results. For half a month, they did not find any trace of the enemy, and no more transport troops were attacked. They thought that the enemy hiding in the dark had retreated and reported this to the headquarters of the new army. Tiger Man looked at the report that he was not very satisfied with and said with a dark face, "Let's keep an eye on them for a while." Although he also knew that it was very difficult for the cavalry scouts to move continuously, he did not believe that the enemy would take the initiative to retreat after tasting the sweetness without suffering any losses. As a result, the thousands of cavalry scouts continued to run on the grassland. Sometimes, when they passed by some trees and valleys, their every move was clearly seen by the Liaodong cavalry hidden in the forest. However, because the latter were already prepared, they missed several times. The sudden attack seemed to have faded away with the passage of time. Gradually, more and more cavalry scouts began to withdraw from the battlefield and return to the various armies and divisions. After all, those who could become cavalry scouts were the backbone of the army. It was impossible for them to gather together to complete a mission that they didn't know would happen. The earth seemed to have returned to tranquility. When the last batch of cavalry scouts also returned to the First City to rest and reorganize, the northern Ming, Liaodong, iron cavalry hidden in the dark began to appear in the sky again like a kite being flown. No, it was the grassland. After a month of ceasefire, the centurion in charge of this attack was named Dong Ping. He was young, bold, and could even be called arrogant. After hiding in the mountains for a month, he suffered a lot. The mosquitoes in the mountains were not to be trifled with. They did not care if you were a general or a soldier. In short, they would bite you when they had the chance. Perhaps it was because of his blood type, Dong Ping was very popular with mosquitoes. When he walked out of the mountains, his exposed skin was covered in red, which greatly affected his glorious image. Dong Ping, who was angry in his heart, naturally couldn't care less about the mosquitoes. He vented all his resentment on the 5-star army. After a month in the mountains, they had basically eaten all the food that could be eaten. Now, they urgently needed to replenish their food. The 5-star army's transport fleet was their best target. Spread the men out and find the closest convoy to us. Surround it and destroy it. Dong Ping looked at the 4 cavalry scouts in his hand and gave an order. Then he led the entire team of 200 cavalrymen and slowly followed behind scouts. When Dong Ping left the mountain, he was also very cautious. First, he sent out the only 4 cavalry scouts to wear the military uniform of the 5-star army. They went out to scout. After confirming that there was no danger in the surroundings, he led the team out. However, he didn't know that not long after he left the mountains, he was discovered by the scouts from the logistics headquarters. Different from the scouts of the new army, these scouts were not discovered by the scouts of the Biming at all. In addition, some of the soldiers did not ride horses. Instead, they pretended to be wandering civilians and dug holes in the ground. They completely hid themselves in the ground and only occasionally poked their heads out to observe the enemy. Therefore, their disguise was not discovered at all. Previously, as the division commander, Su Yunsheng had made a judgment. If the enemy was so hard to find, then they must be hiding somewhere. It was difficult to hide the enemy's army on the flat grassland. Only the trees and valleys could be possible. Thus, he placed some of the scouts near these places where people could easily hide and waited for the enemy to appear. As soon as Dong Ping led his team out, the appearance of his 4 cavalry scouts attracted the attention of the scouts hidden nearby. They were hiding in the holes they dug. When they heard the sound of horse hooves, they quietly poked their heads out. When they saw that it was actually their own comrades, they didn't pay too much attention at first. However, some inexplicable actions of these cavalrymen still aroused their suspicions. When these scouts, disguised as 5-star army cavalrymen, left a mark on the ground every time they walked, this made the scouts feel that something was wrong. If it was the 5-star army's cavalrymen, they didn't need to do this because this area was now under their control. They didn't need to be so careful. Someone who could do this was very likely to be an enemy. When they thought of the possibility of an enemy appearing, the scouts nearby became excited. There were even some soldiers who wanted to directly take down the cavalryman that appeared in their line of sight and interrogate him. This action was stopped by the leader, Li Yun. Li Yun was originally a company commander of the new 2nd Army's 1st Cavalry Division. Because he was very unyielding during the investigation, he was chosen by Yang Si and transferred to the Logistics Command. Yang Si, who thought highly of this person, wanted him to learn more skills, so he sent him to Su Yunxing's cavalry division. He was still a company commander there. This time, he was also sent out and became the leader of a 10-man squad. Li Yun's personality was unyielding, but when he did things, he wasn't reckless at all. He was even praised by his division commander, Su Yunsheng, who said that he had a calm personality and was more suitable to become an outstanding scout. When he heard his team members say that they should take down the suspicious person, he thought about it and shook his head. This should just be the enemy's outpost. If we take him down, it's very likely that we'll alert the enemy. It's better to wait and see. He continued to mark out the marching route. The main force should follow behind. As the leader, Li Yun rejected the idea. The scouts, who were extremely strict, naturally didn't refute him. They stared closely at the route and waited for the enemy's main force to appear. Hard work paid off. More than 2 hours later, Dong Ping brought 200 Liaodong cavalrymen. They had indeed followed the signs. This was because in their eyes, this route was the safest and least likely to be discovered by the 5-star army. Leader, there are 200 cavalrymen, a scout said with excitement in his eyes. Fortunately, he didn't forget his own situation and lowered his voice. I saw them. How about this? When the enemy cavalrymen pass by, we will follow behind them. You go and find other comrades with war horses nearby and spread the news. This time, we will eat them and capture them. I want to see which faction they belong to. Li Yun's eyes were also filled with excitement. He knew that this time, they had encountered a big fish. Their team would definitely make a great contribution. The well-disguised scouting team did not even notice the enemy's scouts, let alone Dong Ping, who was burning with anxiety and was in a hurry to find the convoy to replenish their supplies. They walked past where Li Yun was hiding, and at their closest, they were less than 5 meters away from each other. When Dong Ping's cavalrymen completely passed by, a soldier appeared like an agile monkey and dashed into the distance, turning into a distant black dot. Captain Li Yun followed behind and led the other members of the squad to carefully tail the target. Dong Ping was completely oblivious to all of this. Around him, more and more scouts received the news and began to surround the place where they were. Especially when Commander Su Yunxing found out that the target was only 200 cavalrymen, he made a bold decision. This time, there was no need for anyone else to act. The scout team alone was enough to complete the mission of capturing the enemy. On the grassland, there was a convoy escorting supplies forward. It was already afternoon, and the sun shone on the people's bodies, making them feel comfortable without the slightest bit of heat. If a cold wind blew past, the feeling would be even more comfortable. In this kind of weather, whether it was the 100 soldiers in the troop or the 200 civilians accompanying them, all of them had a happy smile on their faces. Sometimes they would even perform a military and civilian cooperation, singing a few unique battle songs that belonged to the five-star army as they walked. It was a scene of unity and joy. The good times didn't last long. This scene was quickly disrupted by the sound of the cavalryman's footsteps. When the company commander heard the sound of the cavalryman's footsteps, he instinctively shouted, "The convoy has stopped. Everyone, prepare for battle." You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.